Omi Tutu, Ana Tutu, Ile Tutu, Tutu Laroy, Tutu Alabata. We ask the ancestors and the spirits to freshen the road, to freshen our heart, to freshen our way so that we can move forward. Kosi Ku, Kosi Kitiku, Kosi Rin, Kosi Yofa, Kosi Ona, Kosi Eo, Awako Ababa. The ancestors live forever. We ask them to keep away uh, death, to keep away illness, to keep away negativity, to keep away those things that interfere with us going forward. Iba Baba, Iba Yeye, Iba Junakan, Iba Bobo Egun, Egun, Kota Bobo Egun, Baba Kaminta Bobo Egun, and Larry Neo Mia Belay. This time I ask you to call out the names of your ancestors. They can be your cultural ancestors, they can be your own ancestors, but call their names. Call their names out.
Obi Kambon.
Right, more names.
Mark,
Sarah,
Marcus Garvey.
Norman Glad,
Right,
Margaret Cofield.
right.
Edwin Martin, Jackson,
Turner.
Evelyn,
Patricia Hardy,
Clara,
John Lewis,
Toby Cambon, Francis Cresswell
Red
Singh,
Roger.
Dr. C.T. Vivian.
Other Cresswell.
All of the ancestors, of those represented here, all of our cultural ancestors. We pray for the men and women who have been murdered here, the young men and women who have been murdered in the streets with special prayers as Black parents, as Black sisters, as Black brothers. We ask that the ancestors guide us through this, as challenging as it is. We've been through challenges before, people, and we have made it before. We will make it again. We will all say Ashe, Ashe,
Ashe. Ashe.
Asheo.
Ashe.
Ashe. We will have a 2-minute interlude from Brother Cedric Baba, who will lead us in a brief drumming session. Thank you, Baba Cedric, for that drumming. Again, I want to welcome all of you all to our Facebook Live page. My name is Yuma Toms, and I'm the chair for the National Convention of the Association of Black Psychology. And today, given the time period that we're living in, how apropos it is that we're able to provide this UJIMA collaboration between the National Association of Black Social Workers and the Association of Black Psychologists. As we have experienced within the last 24 hours with the passing of C.T. Vivian and Congressman John Lewis. Now more than ever, we must present a united front to combat systemic and institutionalized white supremacy. And this platform will give us the opportunity to learn what we must do together. We've entitled this series, The Pandemics of COVID-16-19 to COVID-19, Healing Through UJIMA. This and future virtual gatherings are being done to fortify ourselves as Black folks with tools to change the systems that impact every facet of our life. Each presenter today and moving forward will uniquely speak to the disproportionate impact slavery, police brutality, COVID-19, and other forms of systemic oppression has had on our Black communities and our wellness. As Black folks, we've had a long and beautiful history of taking care of one another in systems that actively try to destroy our joy, our health, and lives of the people that we love and invest in. These presentations will offer a guidebook to healing Black trauma, increasing mental wellness during intersecting pandemics. At this particular time, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, who is State Representative Leslie Love. State Representative Leslie Love is serving her third term representing the 10th House District, which comprises Redford Charter Township and a portion of Northwest Detroit. Love serves as the House Appropriations Committee, as well as the Appropriations Subcommittee on Health and Human Services and Transportation. House Representative Love is also the Democratic Vice Chair of the Joint Capital Outlay Subcommittee. In addition to her committee assignments, Love has served as the Democratic Caucus Vice Chair, Second Vice Chair, and Chaplain of Michigan Legislative Black Caucus, Treasurer of Progressive Women's Legislative Caucus, and the Greater Wayne County Caucus and co-chair of the bipartisan and bicameral Michigan Legislative Sportsman Caucus. Before her election to office, Love was the Director of Theater Operations and adjunct professor at Marygrove College for 12 years. She was a professor for Wayne County Community College District as well. In her spare time, she pursued her avocation as an actor, playwright, and stand-up comedian. Love was born and raised in Michigan. She grew up in Detroit, attended Detroit Public Schools, and graduated from Cooley High School. She earned a Bachelor of Arts from Siena Heights University, a Master of Fine Arts at Wayne State University, and a Master of Arts in Human Resources Management from Marygrove College. Please welcome State House Representative Leslie Love. And you're muted.
Of course, I began muted, right? I was saying thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Dr. Toms. And I am honored. First, I want to say I'm just honored to be invited to be a keynote amongst such distinguished individuals and two outstanding organizations. So I thank you, the National Board of the Association of Black Psychologists and the Association of Black Social Workers for assembling in this way, for all the work that you do on the front lines in the community. I'm honored and humbled to be before you. And to your national president, Dr. Jackson, and to Julian Bass of the Detroit chapter, I bring you greetings. And thank you again for having me. So, and I must thank, I wouldn't be here without the recommendation of my illustrious soror, Dr. Austin Williams of the wonderful sorority Sigma Gamma Rho Incorporated. Thank you. And so I wanted to say thank you for even making me an option. So I thought I would come to you with a kind of broad topic of the impact of injustice in relationship to politics. And so I'm going to begin by saying I was inspired by your mission of the National Association of Black Psychologists. When you say that your mission is the liberation of the African mind, the empowerment of African character, the enlivenment and illumination of the African spirit. I said, whoa, that is so deep and profound. That just should be repeated every day. That's how the meeting should begin. Like, that is what we are, the enlivenment and illumination of the African spirit. And so I'm thinking about the context of our theme today and this UJIMA and the environment of COVID and everything that's happening in our civil uprising and the police brutality. And I was recently, along with 4 other of my colleagues, invited to speak to the Republican caucus about being Black in an era of the protests, in light of all that's happening right now. And I thought it was, I was taken aback by it because I said, there's not enough time, and whatever time you're giving me, to explain my Black experience in the context of what's happening right now. And it was quite unreasonable. But I think these were my white colleagues trying to seek understanding. And so I thought instead of talking to them about my experience, I would give them kind of the story. And so that's what I want to share with you today, this impact of injustice and our disengagement or a strange relationship maybe with politics and our being Black people. And the context is keeping in mind that between 1808 and 1816, the United States was not yet the United States. France and Britain and everyone else was here. We were fighting for this land. And around 1814, the British are in a big battle with America. And they come to a peace treaty. And Britain is getting their butts kicked, for lack of a better way to say it. And in the midst of this guy that you all know, Francis Scott Keys, writes this song. He's a slave owner, and he pins the lyrics to what we now know as the Star-Spangled Banner. And every time before a game or some great American function, we sing that Star-Spangled Banner. And we know the story of Colin Kaepernick when he took that knee, and happened to know his story when he was actually, to me, giving the most sincerest way to protest, to bring attention to police brutality, and understanding the context and the third stanza in this song, in that verse, that was really the diss track. Because at the time in 1814, when this was happening, we weren't the United States of America yet. We were trying to become. And in that process, British soldiers, their country recruited enslaved Black people to fight in that war, and said, hey, if we win this war, we will free you. And that didn't happen. And a lot of those folks, the British didn't win. And so they fled to the Caribbean and to Canada and other places, those who could. And then still we carry on now after 1814, we're figuring out how we're going to function. And we get into this civil war between 1861 and 1865, where we have the Southern states, the Confederate states, keeping their slaves in the Union, having a problem with this, but not because of their humanity or decency, but because of economics and politics. If the South was getting free labor and we're trying to build a new nation and we need resources, well, this is not equal. It's not right. So they wanted to change that way of doing business. And then in 1862, I think not enacted until 63, is the Emancipation Proclamation that President Lincoln signs that freed slaves. But in that process, we're still struggling of who we are as a nation. And there's still northern states that have slaves, and it's very confusing, and we end the war, and in the 13th Amendment, we're trying to figure out how to bring back those Confederate states into these, what would become the United States. And it's in that moment between the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment where I see for the first time, I would say episode 1 of Black Lives Matter, that we were important in this conversation even before that, when we were fighting in the war of who would run the land that we now call the United States of America. And then we were used again when we tried to make one union to say, no, there's not one system here and a different one in the North. We have to be on the same system. And having Black people free and then able to vote to decide who would serve in our capital, who would make the laws that would govern us, that still affect us to this very day, started then. And then it's the first Reconstruction that we go through. And then we go through what's considered the second Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement from the 1950s and the 1960s, all again to make sure that Black people have a space in this conversation, but it was always in a white context, defined by how they needed to use us to create the system that we struggle with and have a lot of injustice issues with today that you work to address. And so whether it was the Civil Rights Movement, the Voting Rights Act, and then now where we are today in the third Reconstruction, I think it's called the moral movement. And this is, to me, the place where people like the psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, teachers, ministers, mothers, fathers, elders come in and play this significant role in deciding how we will be engaged, when will we be engaged, to understand and recognize our humanity, to readjust our moral compass, to include the lives of Black people in the way that is truly inclusive and in a way where it's recognized and implemented what we say. And so I am moved by this quote, and don't call me corny for quoting this particular individual, but it's a good quote. From, it goes, "Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is real, but fear is a choice." And so that leads me into some of my final remarks in this space. As we deal in a situation, and I'm personally having a very unique situation with being of the age where I'm now the care provider for my mother, who is in a nursing home. And in the state of Michigan where I am, and probably where you are, there's been a lot of restrictions of how we have access to our loved ones that are in long-term care facilities. We've had restrictions coming right after winter into a pandemic where we're still locked in the spring, and then we're slowly being released. And then we have the police brutality, and we have job loss in this extreme economic downturn, and then responding and reacting to that. We have, I don't want to say abbreviated, but just altogether missed graduations and proms, the big game, all those end of year, those moments of transition, weddings postponed, and things like that. And the stress and the fear that comes from that of what is next, How do I move forward? How do we go back to work or go back to school or visit our loved ones in a long-term care facility? How do we interact and move forward in a political context? What we do, and I think as a state representative, I think is important, is understanding our role in the political conversation and that healing and those productive conversations that need to happen around that. When the speaker invited us 5 African-American reps in that space, I was originally highly skeptical and a bit offended. And after many, many, many conversations, I understood and I choose to believe that he was seeking understanding. And in that understanding, some kind of peace of mind. And what happened in our conversation, even amongst us, the 5 of us Black folks who went in to have that conversation, was a lot of conversation we had and a lot of interflexion and reflection on this moment right now. And the importance of our mental well-being, our importance of being this figure, this leader in this space to provide a pathway, a light to how we navigate to and through this period of time. And to do that in a way of civility, but also vulnerability. To be very honest, you're sad is sad, you're glad is glad, you're mad is mad, and it's all valid. And all of those feelings are real, and how to take that and move that into something great and move that into your greater self and productive, and to balance your life and your spirit, that illuminating spirit, that return to connection to the source, that I'm thinking that these 2 organizations are definitely aware of. As a part of the Unity Church, when I looked at your mission and your purpose, I saw a lot of parallels in that. And how we start to heal our neighborhoods and our communities and ourselves individually is to, one, understand our context and our history in the storyline of the United States of America. That all of our dysfunction, all of our concern, the death, the brutality, the discrimination, the injustice, and our rage, our sadness, and even fear is justified. But to move that to a place where we have this enlightenment and illumination of spirit, where that mind is liberated and that we are empowered in our African character, and to do that in whatever space that we occupy. And so I would hope that part of our conversation is our relationship to being, as the play Hamilton says, in the room where it happens. That our politicians, African-American politicians, who most often represent some of the most underserved, disenfranchised, overlooked communities, not shy away or not browbeat Black politicians, but to actually be educated and be supportive and be embraced by the community. Because it's so important, as we tackle the issues that you have on your agenda, that we also have Black police chiefs, that not just because the color of their skin is Black, not Black by skin, but Black by kin, that you really do have a sense of community and you do know your history. And there are relationships there, that you have Black physicians and teachers and bankers and presidents of corporations, that we are in the places where we can really affect change. And so I think it's so important when I occupy this space as state rep and I'm in those rooms and I see, oftentimes it's 1, maybe 2. If it's 2 of us, we're like, yay, that even in this, the mental health of us occupying that space, being that one representative, that one voice that's supposed to be the voice for all, which is an unreasonable expectation. and burdensome, because I just really look at all of us as really ordinary people that have extraordinary capacity. And when we tap into that, we're able to do these amazing things like what we're seeing now, a change in attitude. And I hope it's not a temporary response to George Floyd and all the uprising about that. But this is the beginning, and it's so tricky. And this is a place where you and I come in to figure out how not to let this be a moment, but a movement, part of this third reconstruction, this moral movement that needs to happen in our country, and to stay a part of that conversation. So I know that you'll be talking more about that, and my time is probably running up right now, but I really just wanted to hit on your mission in relation to what I said, the impact of injustice and from a political viewpoint, and that we are all in this space, particularly politicians, and people, if you're the social worker or the counselor at school or the psychologist, that the healing happens with us, but also in the context of our history, in relationship to being in the spaces where we need to be. And to particularly, because I can't help but to re-emphasize this, you asked an elected official to come and be your keynote speaker, to say to you that the people who are elected, your governors, your mayors, your city council, all the elected officials, particularly when they are Black people or African American, representing some of the most distressed communities, and also some of the most affluent communities. But that's a unique, dynamic place that needs support and needs engagement in a way that I like to see in this 21st century. And that you're all supportive and find those places, and that you have a voice and come talk to us. I'm segueing a little bit, invited to Michigan Association of Counselors. I received an award from them for some of the work I did around counselors in schools. And they were so appreciative, and we were talking about our students in schools and our teachers and our mental well-being. And in the context of this, and why we're gathered here today in this cooperative economics and this village concept of healing, this, not only the conversation is important, but I think once we take the action to see it in living color, to be it, and being that, and I've never seen it until this COVID happened as much now, how much when we started to come out, people just wanted to touch you. You remember that? When you came out, they just wanted, people just come up to you, start hugging you like, hey, I don't know, I'm not ready for the hug. But all of that was a part of it. And that touch, oh man, that touch, that people wanted to be touched. They wanted to be heard. They wanted to be seen. They couldn't wait to go in the grocery store. They was dressing up to go grocery shopping. It was just this amazing new, and I said, this is our community, but we also want to show up in a very significant way and take opportunity in this moment and not let it just be a moment, but like I said, a movement of where we grow from here, where we grow from here and maintain those roots. And so I'm looking forward to being a part of that journey. Way after the title of state representative is no longer here, I'll always be engaged and involved. And it is truly an honor. Again, you are the doctors on the Zoom. And I truly appreciate your expertise and what you do for community. You're some of the brightest and the best. I don't know why y'all asked me to talk. You have just some excellent, outstanding men and women in these two organizations. You're just so needed and so appreciated. So thank you. Thank you so much. Peace be with you.
Thank you very much, House Representative Leslie Love. Before you leave, there are a couple of comments on Facebook, and one was posed as a question that maybe if you just have a few moments to respond to. And it has to deal with, as you talk about the impact of injustices. And one of the things that certainly continues to circulate and is gaining national attention is the reparations. How do you see reparations as being an aspect to create healing, or an aspect of acknowledging the past challenges that we've had and the need for reparations as we move forth during this time period?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. So a few years ago, I went to South Africa and we did that whole tour, and there was this big movement of truth and reconciliation. And part of this reparations conversation to me is a truth and reconciliation conversation. It is when people say, you know, we have to have that talk with our sons and daughters about police officers and being pulled over. First, it's the acknowledgement, because there's still people who don't believe, did that really happen? Is it really that bad? Is that what's going on? It's like, absolutely. Let's be true about what's happened as our nation became a nation. Let's be true about the disenfranchisement of Black folks, even during the Emancipation Proclamation, when African Americans were given farmland. And then when they were bringing back those Confederate states into the Union, they took that farmland from some of the farmland from Black folk. So while there was this moment, so to speak, of reparations, but then they reversed it. And so this conversation of reparations is real. And I think there was this, maybe it's a false positive start attempt back in 1862, but it is in context of saying, first, acknowledge our story. People forget that it's not that long ago the Civil Rights Act was enacted in 1965. So I think part of reparations is truth and reconciliation. Because if you don't acknowledge the history, if you don't acknowledge the disenfranchisement, how else do you think you owe anyone anything, or that anyone should have access to certain things that we were denied, or then it was revoked?
Thank you so much for that. Again, on behalf of both the National Association of Black Social Workers and the Association of Black Psychologists, we want to thank you for your time this morning and for your words of encouragement as we think through the whole impact of injustices and what we can begin to do to reconcile and make through and make true to who we are as an association and moving forward. So again, thank you very much this morning.
Thank you, thank you.
So before I turn it over to introduce our presidents for the respective associations, I just want to talk a little bit about what today will look like for the remaining time period, as well as make an announcement for future programs. Again, for those of you all that are looking through on Facebook Live, we encourage you to share the link out with other individuals so that we can again spread the word. Please do so through your Facebook postings or through Twitter or through Instagram. So again, that we can reach a large people regarding the important and significant conversation that we're having this afternoon. Also, we will have two separate panels this afternoon. Our moderator for those panels will be Brother Omar Neal. The first panel will be focusing on aspects of social workers and how they have addressed the pandemic. And the second panel will focus on looking at a color of needs assessment research opportunity. But they both provide rich conversation as it relates to where we're at this particular time period between COVID-19 and COVID-19. Also, we will be having future virtual gathering meetings. Another one will be held on August the 1st, and Dr. Theopia Jackson can talk more about that when she comes on to introduce our moderator. And then we will have one on August the 15th, which will focus on the complexities of racial trauma. And during that time period, Drs. Joy DeGrue, Drs. Wade Noble, Dr. Jerome Chile, as well as Dr. Patricia Newton will be joining us. And then on September the 12th, we will have another one that will deal with the intersection of GLBTQ and the pandemic as it faces within African and African American communities. And Drs. Amy Robinson, and Jeff Gardier will be joining us for that particular panel. So with that being said, I would now like to introduce the presidents for both association, President Melissa Harvey for the National Association of Black Social Workers, and President Dr. Theopia Jackson for the Association of Black Psychology.
Good afternoon, how you doing? Greetings from the National Association of Black Social Workers. I am the interim president of NABSW. My name is Melissa Haley, and I am from New Orleans, Louisiana. I want to thank Brother Yuma. He has done an African's job in putting this together. He has emailed us and kept us in line, and I want to thank you, brother, for the love. And I want to thank Sister Dr. Jackson, who had the vision to collaborate with NABSW, our brothers, sisters, cousins, and them in the struggle, as we say in the country. So we want to thank y'all for joining us. And as we celebrate today in this climate, the transition of two of our brothers on yesterday, Reverend C.T. Vivian and Brother John Lewis, one day after 158th birthday of my shero, Sister Ida B. Wells, we will continue to stand on your shoulders. We will speak your name. But one thing about NABSW, we are all over from Boston to the Bay. But today you get to hear from our educators straight out of Flint and Hampton and an Army brat. And I want every Black brother and sister to know that you too can be great like these educators from Morgan State. You too can make a difference and make a change in our community. That, in fact, is the expectation. So as we move forward, I want to quote my shero, and she says, the way to right wrongs is to shine the light of truth upon them. So in the spirit of the ancestors, let there be light. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you, my dear sister Melissa. Hotep, greetings, family within the Association of Black Psychologists and beyond. It is a blessing to be here with you. Before we go any further, I'd like to ask Elder Pat to come back on and briefly explain to everyone the meaning of libations and the purposefulness of drumming, again, in locating us in who we are of people of African ancestry. Elder Pat?
Okay, as you can see, I've kind of changed locations here. It's really hot in New York. Libations, okay. We pour libations, which according to tradition, African tradition, it's important that we tell the ancestors how important they are. That's different from worshiping. We don't worship like you would worship God or you would worship, whatever. But we do express big time appreciation. So at the beginning of every important ceremony, it could be anything from childbirth to funerals, to weddings, anything that's important, meetings in this case, we reach out and we express our appreciation for for how far we have come. And we express not only our gratitude, but we express our hope and our expectation even that ancestors are still with us, hear us, and will continue to be with us to move, in this case, our association forward and our people forward. Is that good enough?
Perfect. And just a reminding that the drumming is part of our spiritualness and the messaging that's there. That this is not entertainment, as the drumming brings forth important lessons and communications to bring us together.
It's also important to note that drumming and dancing, that whenever we do drumming, dancing, singing, that's why our singing is so outrageous, so that we're calling with every vehicle that we have.
Thank you, Elder Pat.
Madam Jackson,
Yes.
President Jackson,
Yes, Representative Love.
may I just say this one thing, because this is so important when you brought up the drums, and I'll be quiet.
You're fine.
For the first time in the history of the state of Michigan, we had, after, so you know, before we begin session, we have prayer. And for the first time in the history in the state of Michigan, I had African drummers give the prayer. And we had that this February. Thank you. Yes. And let me tell you, it was not easy. I had to put up a campaign to get it done, but the speaker was willing. And so we did. And for the, in the one, this is the 100th legislature. We've never had that. They recognized us. I made them recognize us during that 100th legislature. It was such a blessing. Oh, I just had to share that.
Thank you. So
the African drummer.
Thank you for sharing that, Representative Love. And so we have to keep going with the spirit. So I do want to ask Baba Cedric to say, give you 30 seconds to sort of acknowledge again the value of hearing this as one of our spiritual leaders in drumming.
Yes, greetings to everybody once again. I didn't greet you guys kindly. To all first ladies and gentlemen and everyone under the sounds of my voice, we're all God's children. Thank you. The drumming is extremely important simply because it's a way of connecting that pulse and that heartbeat to what it is that we do and who we are. When you look at the respective organizations gathered here today, there is a pulse. There's something that pulsates through what we do and who we are, not just for ourselves, but for our people. The instrument in and of itself has been around for thousands of years. The djembe has been around for over 2,000. Then came the mother drum, which brings about balance. Here, a lot of times when these type of organizations take place, there are a lot of women, which are the mothers, which helps to carry those things, and the males come behind to make sure that the foundation is laid. That's the same thing it is with drumming. So I'll just end it there. I appreciate the time, but it's extremely important because it helps to remind us that seed, that spiritual seed inside of us from being a gamete that pulsates through time and space and then comes into fruition. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be a part of this prestigious organization as well. I salute each and every one of you.
Ashe, thank you, brother. I also want to give a brief shout out to the hard work and leadership of Brother Yuma and Sister Liddell and all those who supported you in bringing this forward and what we have more to come. And I also want to say to Representative Love, shout out for acknowledging and articulating our mission statement, because that was going to be part of my welcoming. And as you can see, we are embodying it, we are living it. So when I think about the role of Black psychology, we are intimately connected with that of our sister organization of the National Black Social Workers, because we've been deep in this work together for a very long time, as have been other Black organizations. So when I think about it, I want to think of us as village partners, and we are in a unique opportunity where we need to have a stronger galvanization of our Black energy, our Black love. And so shouts out to other folks in the struggle with us, such as the Black Psychiatrists Association. As a matter of fact, almost every discipline does in fact have a Black component within it. Why is that? Because there's a spiritness that we know that's needed within those disciplines. So this is my invitation on behalf of all the members of the Association of Black Psychologists of how do we reach across and lock arms together as Black organizations and become that wall, if you will, or what I also heard on a call today that was done with our brothers and sisters in South Africa who birthed the Forum of African Psychology, which is the sister program to the Association of Black Psychologists. The way they spoke of it, which I love, is creating a Black collective identity. So I would invite that is our call to action in the midst of the nexus of these two pandemics. It is the unique opportunity that's coming out of this chaos, is for us to transform into strengthening the bonds that we've had informally as we galvanize and lock arms and protect our people and move us all forward. In closing, I do want to say too that honoring our cultural warriors who have transitioned on and remembering that we are spirit beings having a human experience, that I am filled when I think about the warriorship that is in our ancestral realm today. And the welcoming they're having Oh, I always get tearful. The welcome that they're having is a welcome in our recent brothers and sisters, particularly Congressman John Lewis, who fought a long, long battle on this side. Imagine what he's going to do on the other side, locked on with the rest of our ancestors. As we continue these conversations for all of our listeners, as people of African ancestry, this is our time to step in, step out, step up, and define who we are through our eyes, through our lineage, to move away from all the distraction about whose social economic status is what, who's got a degree here, who's in national, international. If we do not seize this moment now, our future babies should hold us accountable. This is our space and time. So please continue to join in these conversations with us. Congress Representative Love, I appreciated when you were giving accolades to the degrees on this call, but let's be very clear. The degrees on this call was something granted by somebody Western. The essence of what we have to bring must be grounded in our culturalness, must be grounded in reclaiming our own indigenous knowledge and language and moving it forward. So the boldness in which you brought the drumming into that space is the boldness of which we should make sure that all of our folk know who they are, whose they are, and they cannot do that if they don't know their Africanness, and then decide. And I'll close with a proverb that I heard beautifully today as I was filled in joining the African Psychology webinar that was hosted by the Forum of African Psychology in South Africa. And the quote reads, I should have found it by now, my apologies, but bear with me. I have so many notes I keep writing in my book forever and ever and a day. I'm learning so much as the president. And I'm okay with that. Okay, it's lost to me in here right now because I think the ancestors want me to articulate in my own words. So thank you. It basically says that in order for us to move forward, we must understand from whence we came. And when we understand from whence we came, which is well before colonization, then we will command our own future in terms of re-embracing Mayat in that balance. So again, thank you everyone. Enjoy of this, contribute to this, and I hope it stimulates further conversations in your own spaces and places, and particularly with your loved ones and family.
Thank you both, President Haley and President Jackson. And President Jackson, I'll turn it over to you if you would like to introduce the moderator, and then we'll begin from there.
Sorry for that brief delay. Well, actually, Brother Omar Neal has been known to ABSI for quite some time. I've been blessed to be in direct contact with him as the president, and it has been extremely invigorating for me. So not only is he a past mayor for Tuskegee, but he's a phenomenal motivator, speaker, just a warrior in the work. And he has a wonderful radio show that he hosts that even the title makes perfect sense. The title of that show is You Got the Power. Okay, it's not asking anyone's permission. It's not putting us in a victim stance. It's not perpetuating our pain. It is saying you got the power. So the title is messaging in of itself. So I am excited for his joining with us in this space and what he brings to moderating, because we will learn just from that engagement as well. So Brother Omar Neal, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jackson, and thank you for allowing me this sacred opportunity to engage in this conversation. You know, it was not too long ago that I had one of your founding members on, Dr. Wade Nobles. And Dr. Wade Nobles said something to me that continues to resonate with me. He said that when you are really looking at this, when we really just strip it down to its very, very fundamental common denominator, it's all about us seeking and asserting our own humanity. See, this whole notion of humanity is what calls for you and for us to be mistreated, not only in this country, but in the world. It is when we assert our humanity that we will be the true and perfect manifestation of God's intent for us. When we recognize that we do have the power to be and to operate and to animate ourselves in this universal space, then we will truly be liberated. It was Marcus Garvey that made it, that said it first, but Bob Marley made it famous when he said, "Whence others may free the body, none but thine own self can free the mind." And in this moment of I would say, transformation, I believe that this is one of those watershed moments. Last night, in just thinking about my dear friends, Dr. C.T. Vivian, and as well as Congressman John Lewis, and them dying or transitioning on the same day, that's a message in itself. I don't want us to get lost in the fact that it's just something that was happenstance. No, it is providence, and their message should be what we go back to, the message of human dignity being something that we assert, the message that we will use our vote to determine where resources are distributed, and that who governs over us, we will choose. And so I am so elated to be here, to have a conversation about how do we frame the issue and how do we move forward. I'd like to thank all of the participants that have preceded me. I mean, just everyone from Elder Griffin, Dr. Tom's, Representative Leslie Love. You were such an inspirational, inspiring, enlightening person. Thank you so very much for your candor and for the purity of your thoughts. I gain much from your exchange, and to all of the individuals who are not only with us here on Zoom, but in the Facebook Live space, we welcome you. I'm going to bring forth what I call the Morgan State connection. I mean, Morgan State University is a tremendous university. It's an HBCU, and it has tremendous people involved. So I'm honored of being a Tuskegee man to engage three individuals from Morgan State University in a discussion about how do we frame the issue, how do we get to the core issues, and then what do we do from here? Now what? Where do we go from here? I would like to first introduce Dr. Jerome Schilling, who is the professor and chair of the PhD department at the School of Social Work in Morgan State University. I also like to bring on the chair of the MSW department at Morgan State University, Dr. Rhonda Wells Wilburn. And of course, none other than, certainly last, but they say, but not least, Dr. Anthony Eastreet, who is the tenured associate professor at Morgan State University in the School of Social Work. He also directs the Health and Addiction Research Training Lab. And so I want to let you know that we have some heavy hitters here. Thank you, Morgan State University, for being a part of such a rich conversation. I want to start with you, Dr. Wilburn. I want you to see if we can frame this issue properly. You know, if we look at all that's happening in the world with the George Floyd situation that really catapult the Black Lives Matter movement to another level, as we look at all of the the shifting politically and otherwise. Is this that Kairos moment? Is this that special moment by which the stars line up where maybe we can begin to make inroads towards that space of human dignity for all?
So I'm going to answer your question. Greetings, sisters and brothers. I'm going to answer your question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shirley because he is our resident social work African-centered scholar. I want to say greetings to our organization's president, Sister Melissa Haley. Thank you for gathering us. I want to respond to that, and then what I'll say is I'll turn it over to Dr. Shirley, and then I'll come back on after he finished speaking. One of the things that I told a lot of people during the protest, especially at the beginning, because I had a lot of people asking me to be quiet on social media and not to say anything because, you know, there are police officers and law enforcement peoples in our families, and we certainly want them to be safe. I mean, we certainly want everybody to be safe. But I had to ask some people to unfriend me because I believe we are at the front of a huge door that we have the opportunity to kick down. And I know for myself, I've been working in the trenches for 30 plus years, and I'm not walking away from that big door until we kick it down. So, and so the ones who didn't unfriend me on their own, I unfriended them, and I'll friend them back again. But we cannot walk away from opportunities like this. And it is a great opportunity because there are some more humane people among us than we've had in the past. And we have to take advantage of that because we don't know what the future will bring. And we also have to model what our ancestors have modeled for us in terms of being revolutionaries and, you know, being willing to take on the fight. And so I want my sons to look back and see that our generation did their part. And so, sir, I believe that, yeah, we're at the verge of something that potentially can be very huge, but we have to make some huge decisions during this time in order for that to be manifested. And then I'll defer to my colleague, Dr. Shirley.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And again, I'd like to thank Sister Melissa Harvey, Miss Haley, and Sister Jackson for engaging in Harambe and UJIMA to bring this together. This is a wonderful event. To answer your question, Brother Neil, I'm a little, I'm kind of a Malcolm and a Martin. On the one hand, I'm optimistic about what I see currently. I do, you know, the Martin part may be that there is some redemption for white America, perhaps. The Malcolm part of me is that no, there's no redemption for white America. And so I slide back and forth frequently between Martin and Malcolm. And I think many of us in the Black community do. And so I am hopeful. It has been nice to see these multiracial coalitions come together and protest. It seems like a lot of the young whites are progressive. The question is, will they be progressive when they're 45 and 55 and 65? It's easy to be progressive and liberal when one is 19 or 20. But as we move forward, people become more invested in the society. And of course, we know about the whole process of cumulative advantage that white people develop over time because of the, as Du Bois called, the wages of whiteness. So I'm a little on both sides. I'm between Martin and Malcolm on that. To really answer your question. But I am hopeful, and I think that is one of the things that if we look at the history of our people, that we've always had faith in the impossible, that we've always had faith in a better tomorrow. I mean, if you had betted on us 200 years ago that we would be a free people, that is free to some extent, and that we would have some degree of mental consciousness about ourselves, if you had said that 200 years ago, you may not have won that bet. So I think, as Malcolm would say, time would tell, Brother Neil, whether this is a moment or a movement.
You know what's so interesting, and thank you so very much, Dr. Shelley. The point of the matter is this. It was a person by the name of Neely Fuller who put it this way. He said, if you don't understand racism, then anything else you think you understand will only serve to confuse you. The fact of the matter is our condition was planned and premeditated and instituted in structures that perpetuated itself. And so I want to bring a fourth Dr. E Street on as well to talk. And what I don't want to do is to make this a monologue. I want a dialogue. So I want you all to kind of chime in and kind of keep this going. The point of the matter is, at this point, we need real clear understanding, and we need to stop trying to equivocate on what we are dealing with. A lot of times we have tried to pander, we've tried to appease, we've done a whole lot of stuff. At this juncture, we need clarity of thought. We need honesty, right? We need courage to speak truth to power, right? So at this moment, I want to talk a little bit about how does racism interface? And then I want to ask this question to the entire panel. I was always told that once you bake something into something, once you bake an ingredient into a cake, you cannot extract it after it's baked. I want to ask the question, can this system be saved? Because racism is baked in. Dr. E Street.
Thank you so much. And again, I want to thank Sister Haley for inviting me to be on this panel and amongst a whole variety of greatness in the group that we're sharing with. So you raise an interesting point about can this system be saved? And I think I am on the line, similar lines with Dr. Sheely of, I am hopeful, but it's also understanding that it takes a lot of work. And I personally don't think that the system in itself is ready to do the work. I think that there are a lot of people who are much more progressive and liberal right now who are looking to make some changes. So all across social work organizations right now, you hear a lot of people talking about anti-racist work and all that. So, and that's a great step towards trying to remove some of the structural racism that we see in all facets of social work and in the community, right? But it's not going to happen overnight. And what that looks like is that it's going to be an uphill battle, right? Because we see to this day how whiteness or the idea of white supremacy continues to permeate in all aspects of our society, right? So, you hear it when people shout out Black Lives Matter, they say Blue Lives Matter, or they say All Lives Matter, right? So all those different kind of things that, when people are like, oh, we're so inclusive, all lives should matter. It's really saying, no, we want you to still care about us as white people, and we don't want to talk about what's going on in the Black community, right? So until we start to address that, or not us, because we are doing a great job of addressing our Blackness and where we are, I think that until white society starts to address their issue and their insecurity with Black people and the power that we have, I think that it's going to continue to be an uphill battle.
It's interesting, and I agree with that. But one of the things that I find is that many white people don't understand the notion of privilege. They because it is so inculcated and ingrained in all people activity. It's I can't distinguish. It's just how things are, and so we are talking with them, and people oftentimes is constantly trying to make people feel comfortable, even in the conversation of our discomfort. So I want to talk with Dr. Wilburn about that. Even as we talk with the moderate white people, because that's Dr. King had a real, he was always just trying to deal with how do you deal with white liberals or white moderates. The point of the matter is, until people are willing to give up privilege for equity, this conversation is an activity in futility. Am I wrong for saying that?
No, you're absolutely right. And you must have Googled me, because just in the last couple of weeks, I wrote a piece, both of these pieces that I posted on LinkedIn. One is called White Pain, and the other one is dealing with narcissism, because both issues are at the core of the intersection that we find ourselves at. White Pain is interesting because I spent a whole lot of time trying to help Black people live through and move through their pain. And what I've decided in the last few months is, right now at this particular time, perhaps the better thing to do is to help white people deal with their pain. If I really want to help Black people, I'm going to have to do some things to educate and help white people around their privilege and around some things that they take for granted that they don't even recognize and realize. And so I do believe that that is at the heart of the challenge. There is a term that we use called cognitive dissonance, where my imbalance emotionally is so out of order that I will do everything I can to bring balance to it, even if that means doing wrong things. And I believe that that is what has happened, you know, for hundreds of years in this society, that there was such a wrong thing that has happened. And the only way to justify it is to make it right. And so, at least in the minds, I think, of those who have had power. And so one of the things I hear my brothers when they vacillate between Malcolm and Martin, and I do too. But for me, I believe that righteousness ultimately will prevail. And so I believe that you have to bring spirit into it, and you have to bring faith and God into it, because righteousness ultimately will prevail. Now, I don't know what day that will happen on. I just know that we have to prepare for its coming, because it will. And so this is why Black people, we do the things that we do. Like, we show up in the world as if we not oppressed, because we know one day we won't be oppressed. And we want our non-oppressed children to show up in the world in all their righteousness. And so that's why our ancestors taught us the way that they did, you know, to deal with the now, but to prepare for tomorrow. And that everything that we are as a people is really grounded in our faith, and is grounded in our faith because when something is so wrong and so bad, it's no way that it will last all the time. And so so that is the work we have to do together, I believe, is to prepare for the day when this whole thing is dismantled. I think if you understand that the reason that all of this happened to begin with is when someone is it's like somebody is at a disadvantage and they know they cannot win. And so they rigged the whole thing so that they could win. And this is what we are up against. We are up against a situation where we are asking for the field to be leveled, for the playing field to be leveled. But you all know, just like I know, if the playing field is leveled, we know already how we show up when it's not leveled. And so that is the fear, and that is the pain, and that is all of the stuff that other people have to reconcile, and that we have to, I think, begin to help them to reconcile. Otherwise, you know, it will continue to be a humongous battle. And I've spoken too much, and I will.
No. I normally stop people when they speak too much, and because I didn't stop you, obviously, I was flowing with you. I mean, Dr. Shirley, help me out, man, because we're looking at COVID-19. We're disproportionately impacted. We're dying. at greater rates than any other group of people. Comorbidities are rampant in our community. Some people would say this is congenital. I have to say that it's derivative, that it's environmental, and that it's planned subjugation. What say you?
Well, I don't know. I do know that if you look in history that we have had these planned scientific experiments on Black people. We know about the Tuskegee experiments.
Mm-hmm.
We know about the sister at Johns Hopkins. And we know that there has been a very troubling relationship between medical science, social science, and the Black community. Guthrie's work in psychology, the history of psychology, the book's title is so apropos. Even the rat was white, was the name of the book. And so the science, social science, and medical science has played a major role in the oppression of our people through false experimentation, through the advancement of the notion that we're inherently inferior, through reports of our Black families that we essentially were inherently pathological. So yes, science has not always been our friend. But this is why I think we need people in science who can change the science or who can offer different theories, paradigms, and models that can help advance our people. And this is why it's very important for us, those of us in social work and psychology, to advance those perspectives that would help to politically and economically advance ourselves. I do think, though, as we think about how we deal with these issues, and by the way, let's just be clear, they say that American slavery is the original sin. Well, American slavery essentially was the source of our initial and continued trauma. And so how do we deal with that trauma? Historically, we have had pretty much two strains in the Black community to deal with that. And one strain has been a kind of protest model, a kind of integrationist model. I'm not trying to diminish this perspective at all, because it was people like John Lewis and others who basically engaged in protests to advance our civil and our human rights. And I think that Black Lives Matter is now the current protest movement. But we also had a very powerful movement, and we should continue this movement, and that is Black self-help. Through the development of our own businesses, our own self-help organizations, and we have many examples of that as well. So one of the ways to address our issues is that I think that we should offer a team approach, that we need to combine the efforts of the historic protest movement with the efforts of the historic Black self-help or Black nationalist movements. And I think that if we can do that, and some of us may be more nationalistic or more self-help, some of us may be more protest-driven, some of us may have more of a blending of the two. But I think if we can combine this in a team approach that addresses our trauma, both psychosocially and politically, then I think that we could have a lot of success here in North America. But it takes effort, and it takes planning. It takes strategic planning to do that. And I think that we need more of that kind of strategic planning to advance this team approach idea.
You know, it's interesting, Dr. Shealy, this, and I want to bring on Dr. E Street as well. The point of the matter is, in fact, somebody wrote this as a question was Martin Luther King expressed concerns that we were integrating into a burning house. The question was, why would we pursue this when the house that has been built was constructed on a foundation of violence, terrorism, and destruction of the indigenous people and enslaved people of Africa? We talked about this notion of integration, which we've never attained. We've had desegregation, but I contend that we've not ever had integration. But the question is, and it was, I guess Dr. Jackson would have a problem with me saying this. Dr. Jackson said on my show one day, she said, white folk need to go and deal with white folk in their issues. And then black folk need to go and deal with our issues. And then after that, we can come together and possibly, maybe we can reconcile and create a system of fairness and equity for everybody. What say you, Dr. E Street?
So I think, I think that is a very salient point, right? I think there are a lot of things that we do need to address within our own community, right? And one of the things that Dr. Shealy said was around the idea of collective work and doing things that are for us, by us. So I think that, right now, especially, I've seen the movement where, Black people are supporting businesses and we are opening businesses and, we are trying to do more and build within our own communities. I think that is the great approach. I also think that, there's this line of thought that, we shouldn't have to leave the house, right? Because we built everything that they're using. So why should we have to give it up, right? So I think the idea behind that is, yes, we can build and we can continue to build and grow as a community, but that doesn't mean that we have to give up everything that we helped to create to create a new society for us. I think that what we need to do is figure out what we want our society to look like and then move in that direction. Stop asking for permission, stop asking, for people to do it. And I think one of the greatest examples is, our associations that are on the panel today, right? So NABSW and the Association of Black Psychologists, they were birthed out of necessity, right? So if you think about how these organizations came about, they came about because they did not feel like what was going on in the larger society, I guess the larger organization. So let's use NASW as an example, and the association of the APA as the counterpart. They didn't feel like their voices were being heard, so they created another organization that looked and was shaped in their image. So I think the more that we continue to do that, the more that people continue to support organizations that are built for us and by us, and that are supporting organizations that are Black owned and have that Black culture, I think that we're going to continue to see the change that we want to. I think the other thing too that, I wanted to respond to from Dr. Shealy was the idea and this notion of trauma. Slavery was the initial trauma that we faced, but we're still experiencing trauma to this day, right? We are seeing modern day lynching live on social media and on TV, and it's playing repeatedly when we see the killing of unarmed Black people, right? And that does something to our mental health and our overall psyche in terms of how we see ourselves and how we view ourselves in the world, right? So this idea of slavery to 3/5 of a person to, having citizenship and now being killed without regard is continuously impacting our traumatic experiences as Black people. And we have to deal with that, right? For me personally, I know I don't watch any murdering of unarmed Black people or Black people in general on social media, TV. I don't need to see what the outcome is going to be, because that literally leaves an imprint on your mind that makes unintentionally and subconsciously, it makes you feel devalued. So we as Black people have to continue to address and start to confront the trauma and the mental health concerns that we have within our community from these overt acts of racism that we're experiencing.
Thank you, Dr. E Street. But let me say this, Dr. Wilburn, help me out with this, because, the notion that we can just, escape from this society or this country and go somewhere else, I don't think that people are talking about that. But the people are saying this system has never been good for us. I mean, so why would we integrate into a system that's never been good for us? Now, the next question would be, can this system be transformed? Because it's inculcated in all people activity, right? Can racism and can a racist system, can an abusive system be transformed to a point that it becomes palatable and accepting of all people equally?
I don't know if I believe that it can ever be completely transformed, but I believe that more transformation is possible. I do believe a lot of what you said, if the foundation was racism. I mean, we have to also remember, I mean, everything about this place is stolen. Stolen land, stolen people, just, you know, just straight up thieves, thugs, and we get called thugs, okay? So let's be clear about that. So you cannot completely transform into utopia, you know, a society that was built with that kind of unrighteousness. But I still believe that that more is possible. And the other part of it, I guess, that commits me, because I'm already ready to buy some land and go back home to Africa. But the thing that makes me continue to stay committed is I know all our people will never want to do that. There will always be some of us who want to stay. And then so our reality becomes, we are a dual people. We built things there and here, and we deserve to have the rights of our ancestors, both here and on the continent. And so that is our dual struggle for equality, actually both here and on the continent of Africa. Because while we are welcome there to some degree, there's also some struggles we got to still live through in terms of reconciling with our brothers and sisters on the continent as well. And so, I mean, our whole existence as a people, you know, African Americans, is this dual struggle, this dual reality. And that's, I don't think we will ever completely not be in that space, but I believe that more is definitely possible. And I do believe that the best things will prevail, but there will always be some level of struggle.
You know, Dr. Shealy, you know, we talked about Carter G. Woodson, the miseducation of the Negro. We have educational systems. We have, you know, high school and, well, elementary school, high school, and college and universities, right? But we also have universities and colleges that are run by Black people who don't even teach Black history. I mean, so most people have a very limited knowledge of the history of Black people, other than the time that we've been here from 1619. We don't understand our role in the evolution of the world and our contributions. And therefore the esteem, collective esteem of a people is diminished because you don't know who you are, right? So what can we do to get institutions, universities like Morgan State University and Tuskegee and Hamptons and the Howards and all of these other universities to be more intentional about teaching our children who they are?
Well, that's a major question. But I think one of the ways that prevents us from doing that in a more complete way is this dualness that Rhonda spoke about. You know, it depends on how we see ourselves. And I think that even at HBCUs, while there are the trappings and symbols of culture, the knowledge base, for the most part, is still Eurocentric. And the major theories, for example, in psychology and social work, there's still the dominant developmental theory is the Ericksonian model. And Black people teach it, and white people teach it. And so you know, it's a struggle with really who and what we are and want to be. And I've seen it at HBCUs. We are doing, many of us are doing the best that we can within that context. Also, of course, as you understand, there's the issue of funding, and a lot of people don't want to bite the hand that feeds it. I think Spike Lee really brought that out in his School Days movie, if you remember that, brother Neil. So the thing is that who do we want to be as a people? It really comes down to, again, identity. Who do we want to be? How do we want to be it? And how do we want to advance ourselves? The problem, however, is that we have a lot of disunity and disintegration within our own race. We don't have the kind of solidarity, even that we had once upon a time, and even then we weren't that solid.
Why, Dr. Sheehan? I want to know, why do you think that's the case? Because I would agree with you, but it's got to be a why.
Well, I think two reasons that we're not as solid as we used to be. First of all, that movement that John Lewis helped to advance really cut like a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it did advance our civil rights. And so our individual freedoms were advanced. So we could go here and go there. We could go to the University of Maryland instead of the Morgan. We could go to UVA instead of Hampton. But it also had some downfalls. And that is that while we opened up more into white society, we became more exposed to the values and themes of Eurocentricity. And many of us began to buy in, particularly to the core value of individualism, that all success and failure is due to us. We began to buy into that value, many of us. We began to expose ourselves to more of the Eurocentric values. And therefore, in many ways, that desegregation in some ways became more of a mental integration, or more particularly, more of a mental imposition or acceptance of Eurocentricity as a value and as a concept. That's number one. But then number two is that by moving more into the broader society, we began to abandon some of our traditional practices. I refer to these practices as strengths behaviors. This was the practice of community practice of spirituality. This was the my brothers and sisters keeper. This was the practice of the Black extended family. This was the ethic and actions of caring and sharing. But as we integrated, we began to abandon a lot of those traditions. And therefore, as the Hare said, Julia and Nathan Hare, we essentially became Black Anglo-Saxons. And we became more Anglo-Saxonized as time moved on. And of course, another factor too is the social class factor. Many of us who are professionals, Brother Neil, maybe when you grew up and when I grew up.
You're talking about the delusion of inclusion? You're talking about the delusion of inclusion?
That's right. But when we grew up, whether you were a lawyer, a doctor, or whether you were just, on welfare, we pretty much lived in the same residential community. But now we see more of a split in the social class residential locations. Black professionals have moved into white neighborhoods, or they've moved into these all Black communities like Prince George's County. And then African Americans of low income status have stayed in the hood or somewhere else, and they're being displaced by gentrification. Maybe we can talk about that too. So what I'm saying to you is that we don't have that kind of solidarity that we once had, that desegregation, although was very beneficial, and I do want to honor C.T. Vivian and John Lewis, I definitely want to honor them, but also that there was some limitations and liabilities of that. And when you talk to many of the elders today, the old people, the old Black people, they say that. They say that we have lost our way and our traditions. And that, to me, is a major problem that we have.
Sir, can I
You know, no, go, please do this. And let me also say this. I want you all to chime in. Don't wait for the question to you. I want this to be a conversation because you know, this is getting good. We can really go forever with this. This is very important. Go ahead, Dr. Wilman, and then I want Dr. Eastreet to come in with the youth perspective, because I think young people are now getting sick and tired of being sick and tired. This kind of gradualism. That you know, I don't think they're going for that on this time. I don't think this is a moment with the Black Lives Matter. I think this is a movement, a real movement. But go with you, Dr. Wilburn, and then I want to bring Dr. Eastreet in.
Okay, I want to say something. I think that Dr. Shirley says something that's very key, but I see it a little bit different. And that is, I do believe that segregation helped to keep us hidden, and that desegregation put us in a situation where actually our diversity got highlighted. Because I believe during segregation, we also had the disconnects as well. You know, you can go all the way back to Harriet Tubman. She had to carry a pistol in order to get some people off those plantations. They wanted to stay. And so that is very clear. And then even during the civil rights movement, and I think we do generations coming behind us a disservice by not being honest about all of this. A very small percentage of our people fought for civil rights. And that doesn't mean that people didn't believe in them, or that people would not have fought if they could figure out how to not go to work and be able to fight. So there was a small group of people who did work for all of us. And so I think that even now we see the diversity of how we show up and how we fight and how we protest and what we believe in and what we don't believe in. And I don't think that that's necessarily a negative thing. I just think that we have to be honest that we don't need everybody in order to move something, because the ideal that we have to have everybody together in order to move, that's the thing that keeps us stuck. But if we recognize and realize that the mountains that have been moved in the past were moved by smaller numbers of people amongst us, and actually, let's be honest as well, and some white people were helping us as well. You know, the diversity of the people who were moving the mountains. And that's what we have to, I think, build on as we move forward. We don't need all of us to be on the same page in order to get the things done that we need to have done in our community.
You know, I think that's profound, and that's true, because you know, everybody knew Martin Luther King now. Everybody was for Martin Luther King now, but when Martin Luther King was assassinated, he was at his lowest approval rating, even amongst African Americans, and so he was not real popular amongst a lot of circles when he was assassinated. And,
well, you
and
know,
so
what I see is the difference now, Brother Neil and others, is that while Rhonda is absolutely correct that you always had a small number of people, but who were able to mobilize a movement and get others to come on board. But the difference is that back in the day, whether you were a nationalist or an integrationist, whether you were down with the nation or down with some other protest organization, there was generally an acknowledgement that racism was real and that racism was a problem. We don't have that kind of consensus today among a lot of our people. Now, this George Floyd thing may have sparked some pieces, but even when people acknowledge racism today in our community, particularly a lot of young people, they focus almost exclusively on the criminal justice system instead of looking at the holistic approach of systemic racism. So I think that that's one of the major differences today, is that many of us have bought into this declining significance of racism model. That racism, oh, it ain't that much of a deal anymore. And I think that that's where the difference is today as opposed to yesteryear.
So I want to chime in and jump in to the conversation, because I do think that there is a different perspective, and that is the perspective of younger people, or millennials, as you want to call them. And I think that, you know, we have to look at it in terms of how protests and how social action happens today. And I think that, you know, what we're seeing is a vast difference in approaches, right? And I think that what Dr. Wilbon said was spot on, in that, you know, everybody doesn't have to be behind this one idea to get some social movement. I think that there is a lot of social action that happens amongst younger people in different formats. So there are going to be people out in the streets protesting. There's also going to be people on social media that are social influencers that can reach millions quicker than you can reach the thousands in the street, right? So I think that the way that social action and protests are happening now is vastly different. The other thing that I want to kind of talk about in terms of just, you know, how we move forward is, you know, the idea of mentoring, right? And, you know, I'm at Morgan State, so I have a plethora of mentors that I can chime into and reach to, right? But I don't think that idea of mentoring has continued to pass on in a degree that it would have been back in the day during the civil rights movement, right? So I can see, and I can go talk to a Dr. Shealy anytime I want to. I can see and I can talk to a Dr. Wilbon anytime I want to, but that's not the case for everybody. And they don't get the same bits of pieces of information that I get on a regular basis, just by having those conversations when I stop past your office. So I think that, you know, when we think about the idea of mentoring and how do we pass this knowledge on to the next generation, or how do we pass this information on to the next grassroots organization, we have to make that an active process. We have to make it a process where we are intentionally going to speak to young people and getting involved, and stop with the idea of young people don't know what they're talking about, or, and you know, and I say this with all the respect. I think that sometimes as we start to have ideas, sometimes older, you know, the elders have to make room for younger ideas and conversations to happen in a space where it's mutual respect and not just shutting people down because it doesn't align with what you may have known in the past.
I want to jump in here too, if I may.
Just let me
Go
just
ahead.
say this very quickly, and then I'll let you, because I don't want to lose my thought. I got a little bit more
Okay,
gray hair than you do. If I don't speak up, then I'll forget.
Okay.
I want to say something about that mentoring piece, because I do believe that one of the secret weapons that we have that we probably have not utilized enough is our educators. As a professor for the last 24 years, I know for certain when I'm ready to go to war, I got some folks that I've educated in 24 years, and I may not even have spoken to many of them during this last 24 years, but I know when it's time to go to war, I know what I taught people, and I know who respects me, and I know who will be there to fight with me. And I think this is true at all levels of education. But we often disconnect our educators from the work that's being done in the community and the policy work that needs to happen. But your educators, I mean, just think about it. Who do you admire? It's the people who've taught you, who poured into you. And I think that there is an opportunity for us to embrace educators so that they can rally the people around them that ultimately create, you know, some of the alliances that we need to develop within our community. And I don't know if we've really done that well. And I think it's a missed opportunity that we probably should try to take advantage of right now.
And, you know, and you're correct. I mean, that's something we need to do, but at the same time, we need to also engender in people that once you are given something, to him much is given, much is required. So you don't get an education so you can distance yourself from your people. You get an education so you can better serve your people, right? And so I think it's the mindset. I think, you know, we've gotten this point where, you know, when you get an education, go away from where you were born or where you started from. And that's what is success. And we have to redefine what success is for us.
If I may.
Different. Yeah, go ahead. Who's that?
This is Rep Love. I just want to say this is
absolutely. Come on back in.
You know, thank you. Dr. Sheila, you had spoke to this, and then Ishri, you did too, a little bit, and it made me think of our place at the protest. And for the first time this year, because I grew up with parents who were union members, and so their strikes and picket lines I'd witnessed and even participated in, so I understood and just grew up in that environment. And for the first time this year, when I saw young people demonstrating or in the uprising, I didn't want to do what I did in my 20s or my 30s or even my early 40s. And I was in a different place. And I was like, where do I help in this? Because I'm not going to do this walk. I've done walks, I've done the sit-ins. I'm not doing that this time. And so I realized that my place was like the young, there was a chapter of NAACP in Lansing in our capital, young adults who needed money. I was like, I can write you a check. I'm in the position now where I can write you a check. I'm in a position where I can hold a door open for you. I'm in a position where now I can give you opportunity and I can give you access to the people who can change those things or make changes to those things that that you reference. And so I think about this when we talk about how do we engage and maintain this wherever we're trying to go, and however this conversation, Dr. Wilborn, if it's a small group like it usually is, even in putting together a conference like this, it'd be a few people working on it, and then you get 50 people on the call. And I think of, because you brought her up, you invoked the ancestor Harriet Tubman, and I looked up her quote because she's an extraordinary woman that I'm very curious about. I was like, I could have never done it. It'd have been a whole lot of dead people trying to get to freedom. They didn't pay attention and keep going now. So she said in one of her quotes, I crossed the line, I was free, but there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land. And so as we work with each other, it ain't easy. But how we do that in these small groups of just being able to work with the group that you can work with. And then sometimes it takes people a little bit longer to catch up or to understand or have an awakening or an enlightenment, and then grab them and bring them to the table. And then to know that as we mature and we go through our cycle of life, where we were in the protest, in the movement, or wherever in our 20s won't look the same in our 50s. And that it's okay to show up in a different space, but just to show up and help the cause and stay consistent with that. So I just wanted to share that little bit of 2 cents and say thank you again, everybody. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've stayed on almost 20 minutes, 26 minutes longer than what I had to, because I was just so into it. This is good stuff. Good stuff.
Yes.
Thank you for putting it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Love. We love you so much, and so love is love. I'm telling you that. So we are so appreciative of you, and let's stay in touch because this dialogue needs to continue, right?
Yeah. All right. Peace be with you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you so much. Let's go finish up, Dr. Ishmael.
I had one concluding thought, and that was just to kind of try to tie it all in. And it's this idea around critical dialogue, right? And these conversations have to happen. I think that, you know, a lot of times, especially now, we're hearing a lot of people having a lot of hard conversations in the general society, but we need to have a lot of hard conversations within the Black society, right? So when we think about what that looks like, you know, inviting people to share, and, you know, where Morgan stays at HBCUs, so even at HBCUs, like, we have to be able to have these critical conversations and not just think because we're at an HBCU, we are, you know, all aligned in the same thought. We'd have to have these critical conversations to see where people's thought processes are, and to make sure that we continue that message of helping the community, going back and giving back to the community. Because, you know, as we rise in terms of degrees and education, again, like Dr. Shealy said, we move out to suburbia. We get, you know, I hear a lot of people in Baltimore all the time talk about, you know, once they get somewhere, the first thing they want to do is get out the city. So that is partially the issue with gentrification. We get out the city and we don't come back and give back or build up within that community. So we have to have these critical dialogues around the community and building the community and what we can provide and continue to, you know, assist in that overall development.
You know, I think that's profound. Dr. Shealy, we talked a little bit about this, and you talked about people going out once they get certain, you know, economic status or whatever, educational status or whatever. But one of the problems that I think we are going to have to deal with is how do we construct an economy? See, there's a distinct difference between having money and having an economy. We're talking about reparations, meaning that somebody will repair Black people for the egregious treatment done to us over 400 years. So what will that look like when you give a people who don't circulate money within their community one full day? What does that look like when resources are in the community that they don't think about how they spend their dollars or who they spend their dollars with to generate an economy, to have the multiplier effect? I mean, how do we get people to understand that we got to do some things within our community, and how do we get to that space? Dr. Shealy.
Yeah, I think, well, that's a very good point. And I think that really, we really have to focus more on a kind of re-socialization or reprogramming of our people. Because one of the effects of white supremacy is that it has taught us to be dependent on white people and white systems. And so we need to be re-educated and re-socialized towards independence. And that starts very early on. I mean, it's not just, again, with family members, school systems, others who are involved in the child's life and the adult's life. And I think also we have to involve all parties in this Black extended family that I mentioned before. But also, I do think that there is a role for social policy. I'm of the belief that we need the combination, as I said before, the team approach, that we need Black self-help, and we need to engage in institutions of self-affirmation. But there is a role for social policy. There is a role for John Conyers' H.R. 40, which was introduced in 1989, 31 years ago. There is a role for considering some form of reparations. Social policy is very important. If we look at how white people have advanced in this society, it's because of affirmative action that has affirmed them. We can look at any particular era in our history, and we can see how government programs, starting with the 1930s New Deal movement, the 1940s, the GI Bill, all were beneficial for whites. They had race-neutral language, but the way they were implemented, the programs were implemented in a race-specific kind of way. So white people have advanced not only because of so-called whiteness, but there has been affirmative action throughout our history for them. And they have benefited disproportionately for government aid and from other kinds of resources in our society. So we do need to build our institutions, but I believe that self-help alone, Brother Neil, is not going to be the source, the exclusive source of our salvation. I think it's going to have to be this combination approach of self-help, but also the role for protest and social policy intervention. I do believe that that is the combination that other groups have used. When the Irish were told no Irish need to apply, they not only built institutions through the Catholic Church, but they also went into politics and began to shape institutions and policies that benefited them. So now look at Chicago, now look at Boston, now look at New York City. I only give that as one example.
Dr. Sheila.
You know, Dr. Sheila, go ahead. What I want to do is because we're gonna, man, we could do this forever. One of the places, and you segue, I think you gave me a good segue right into this. We got to look at politics. We got to be able to get in positions where we don't have to appeal. I mean, we spend our life protesting and appealing to people. I was the mayor of a city. I know once you get to be a mayor of a city, you can make decisions. You know, Representative Love, there's certain decisions she can make because she's in a certain seat of power, right? So what we have to do is influence who's in those seats that are sensitive to our needs and concerns. And that's why voting is so critically important.
Well, I agree with that 100%. I agree with that 100%.
Right. Go ahead.
I do think the voting,
go ahead.
Protest politics, electoral politics, self-help, our salvation and our advancement is going to be a kind of combination approach. And again, we can only look at examples from other groups. The problem, I think, really with this whole thing is that this thing of white supremacy and racism has really been internalized by many of us. This is why I referenced the Hares and their book, The Black Anglo-Saxons. And so how do we deal with, well, I know how we deal with it, but are we willing to really deal with the depths of internalized white supremacy on our people? And how do we get out of that hole? That becomes a major question too. But I'll yield at this point. I don't want to talk too much because my daddy was a preacher.
I want to end on this for myself, Brother Neil.
Uh-huh.
I want to go back to, and I'm such a Harriet Tubman kind of person, but spirit as I get older continues to be something that is, just keeps tugging at me. Mm-hmm. Because I really don't want to see no more bloodshed. I really don't want to see the big war. I really don't want that for my children and their children. Mm-hmm. And so I do believe that there is a place for those of us who are willing, because on any given day, I might not be willing myself, but for those of us who are willing on the days that we have to appeal to others' humanity, even when it looks like it's not there. We still got to go anticipating that it might show up and that it might honor something that is right. And I do believe that that's the part that, some people have been doing, the John Lewises of the world and, the Black politicians of the world. President Obama got so much criticism, but that's what he spent his 8 years doing, trying to appeal to others' humanity. And he did such a good job of it, even though Black people don't appreciate what he did do, that, this country decided to elect a clown following, his election, because they wanted to reverse, even the ideal that a Black man could show up at the White House and stay there for 8 years. So I'm just saying that we have to push the envelope on appealing to others' humanity. At the same time, we're doing all this other stuff, because I'm still with all the other stuff, but we have to create something very formal, I believe, to deal with that piece of it. And maybe we haven't did that as much as we could. I think that the politicians probably have been doing it, but maybe others of us need to do a little bit more of that work as well.
Dr. E. Street, I don't want to always place you with the youth question, but I'm looking at us and that you seem to fit that category real well. Right now we're in the middle of an election, and I believe that this election is more important than even the election of President Obama, because I believe that this president is an existential threat to the world. Not just to this country, to the world. I honestly believe that. I made that statement a long time ago. So this is not new. Do you believe right now that young people understand the importance of the vote? Just think about it. John Lewis just passed. They spent his life emphasizing how important and sacred the vote was. Have we transferred that? And I'm gonna make the point here because it's a salient point. I was talking with Coretta Scott King, and I asked her a question. I said, Miss King, you always talk about what you did right with the civil rights movement, the accomplishments of the civil rights movement. I say, but tell me what you didn't do right. Tell me what you saw as the failings of the civil rights movement. And this is what she said. She said that the greatest failings, as I look back retrospectively, she said the greatest failings of the civil rights movement is that we gave our children the victories of the struggle, but we never gave them the struggle. And so the question is, has the mantle been taken up by young folk? Has the baton been taken by young folk? And have we, as more elders, passed the baton to them? Because this is not a marathon, this is a sprint, right? And this is a relay, right? This not a marathon. I mean, this is not a where you just run by yourself. You have to pass the baton. Have we failed to pass the baton, and are they ready to take the baton now?
So it's an interesting question, right? And I absolutely have no problem representing millennials and answering this question. And I think that the response is exactly what you're saying. I think that young people are very aware and open to voting. I think that young people are also not open to voting the traditional two-party system. I think that what you're seeing now is a revolt from just the idea of democracy and people wanting to see those results. And that looks like, the idea of Bernie Sanders, right? So, if we look at the demographics that supported Bernie Sanders, it was primarily young people who are progressive and want to see a different change, right? And then you have the typical Democratic Party, which is currently represented by Joe Biden. People aren't really feeling an old white man in any of the parties being in those spaces, right? So, young people want to see change. And I think that one of the most profound things that we see is that, the beauty of politics is that you have a choice in who you vote for, right? And this idea of voting Democratic just because you're Black or just because that's what your parents did is starting to wane away. So people are much more aware and much more savvy when it comes to politics, and they're casting their vote how they see appropriate. Does that always fare well for the way that Blacks traditionally voted? Not always. But what we're seeing is that, people are indeed involved in that process and want to be involved in that process and included in the conversation. So the ask of our congressmen and women and representative is that they actually give results and not just the typical lip service that comes from many politicians. Okay.
Let me go back to you with your last thought, Dr. Eastreet. We have only 3 minutes left, so I want you to encapsulate your thoughts. Right now this is a special moment, and I would be remiss if I didn't tell you all that this is an incredible panel discussion. Each of you have were so insightful, and really elevated our thinking on these critical issues. But I want you to find a way to encapsulate right now at this moment what you believe our people and the world needs to hear.
So I think, as closing from this panel, I think that what we need to hear is that, we as Black people are a powerful people, and that, the situations that we're currently facing are not the end all be all. I think that we have some strategies. I think that we have some wonderful leaders, both older and younger leaders, that can lead us forward and move us in the direction to make the change that we want to see. And I think, like Dr. Wilbon said, we are at the entryway to a large door that needs to be kicked down so we can see and envision what that new society is going to look like that we're looking for. And we're not asking for permission. Like at this point, we are making those changes and pushing forward, and we need to continue to push forward, continue to build in the community, continue to develop organizations, continue to develop businesses, and support businesses with your Black dollars. You know, keep that money in the community as long as you can so that we can elevate and lift and work and focus on cooperative economics. We have the tools. It's time to start putting them to use.
Profound. Thank you, my friend. It's been an incredible pleasure and honor to behold your contents. Dr. Wilburn, you know, your thoughts as we close out this particular segment of our exchange. What would you like to leave with the people?
Yeah, I just want these two organizations to develop a coalition together. I think moving forward, we cannot afford not to work together more closely. I think our community needs it and deserves it. And some of the other Black organizations, I know the Black nurses, the Black psychiatrists, and there are probably others. I think that we would be a little further ahead as a community if we had been doing this more constructively. I know we family, but we haven't really did the work. And so we've got to do work together, and maybe this will be the beginning of a biannual or every 3 years or what have you, that we'll come together someplace and have our conference together. So that we all can be at the table and share our thoughts and ideals, and then go back into our communities and do the work there together as well. I just think that to me is critical at this phase. Just like Dr. Street mentioned, I mean, in social media, there are some Black organizations of young people, I'm sure representative of all these organizations, that are, you know, together in these spaces, because we talking about thousands of people that are, you know, in a group called Black Therapists, or, you know, Black Therapists Rock, and these different things. And so I know that these are made up of the collection of our organizations, or people who potentially could be members of our organization. So I just think we need to capitalize on that more. And I thank you all so much for having me, because I know that there are many, you know, we're just a small representative of the great minds, you know, within each of our professions. And so and definitely within social work, there are other social work scholars who could have been asked. And I just thank you all so much, and thank Sister Haley for inviting me.
Brother Neil, if I may be so bold as to jump in very briefly right after what Sister Rhonda was sharing, because it's so apropos. First of all, we will always want to remind ourselves that the ancestors have already given us everything we need, and it's our job to be able to listen and tap into that. So before this COVID hit, I want to say out here that both our organizations, the National Association of Black Social Workers and ABSI, had already independently scheduled to be in Detroit for our in-person conventions right behind each other. So the ancestors were telling us to get ready for this moment. And also, I want to remind us too that we began from the same blood, the same space. Many of our founders shared ideas with one another as they were birthing us. And there was a long time when in fact we did have our conventions overlap. So again, we are just doing what we were meant to do. And I'll close by saying, when I look at the plethora of Black organizations, particularly those who are focused around mental health and healthcare, what I would want to submit is that we deserve to come together and have our own critical discourse. It is a Western way, an American way, to keep trying to find your own corner of the pot and claim your brilliance, right? So the Association of Black Psychologists, as I say this, is not about judgment. It's about reminding us of the disease in which we've been exposed to, is that we all know we're not going to be happy in anybody's white discipline. There's always something that's not working there. So why not be much more intentional coming together and seeing how we can share resources, share ideas. We are not one think. We are a diverse people, but we should all be centered on the goodness of our Blackness and centered on knowing our shared African ancestry, even its differentness within there. So that would be, as the president of the Association of Black Psychologists, and going back to its mission, which is the illumination of the African spirit, the liberation of the African mind, and the empowerment of the African character, we should be the ones to say, everything Black, let's come to the table and make it right.
Ashe. Thank you. Dr. Shealy, you are, I'm going to let you wrap this thing up. You got the last word, my friend.
Well,
You got the power.
It's never the last word, my man. But I did want to mention Dr. Wade Noble's in a very great essay he wrote on the Black family. He entitled it African Root, American Fruit. And I think our way forward is really to take the best of our root and the best of our fruit, bring it together, organize, and support each other so that we can move forward in the future. The best of our root and the best of our fruit.
Thank you, my friend. Again, this was incredible panel discussion. I'm so appreciative for each and every one of you. And we know that the Spirit summons you. In fact, you've been called out to be called on for such a time as this. All right, so I'm going to take it back to the top of the program, and Brother Yuma, you can take it from there and introduce our next segment.
Thank you very much. Can we give a virtual hand clap to Brother Omar Neal for moderating, and for our panelists that participated, Dr. Rhonda Wells-Wilbon, Dr. Anthony Estreet, and Dr. Jerome Shealy. Thank you all greatly. Before I introduce our next segment, which I'm excited to participate in, is Chair Yoga, I just want to read out a few comments and thanking people that did join us on Facebook. Victoria Ona said, "Thank you for this panel. I'm learning so much, so very rich. You are excellent role models for all of us." Vaughn Livingston posted, "This is so refreshing to hear like-minded individuals. I love it here." Delilah Spring said, I've been poured in today. Thank you." These are just a few comments of what has gone on through our Facebook Live posts. And it is going to be even more enriched with part 2 of our panel. But for us to remain actively engaged during this time period, we have a yoga specialist. Please allow me to introduce Dr. Robin Alston. She is a school psychologist and a registered yoga teacher, as well as a practitioner with over 20 years of experience. She's also the founder of Ase Yoga Studio and Tea Room. She has authored 2 books, The Art of Feeling Good, The Power of Ase Yoga, and Ase Yoga with Every Breath Counts. Please welcome Dr. Alston.
Namaste, everyone. This is kind of strange to be talking virtual with the computer, but I want to thank everyone for being here. We're going to start with our practice today, and we're going to begin by closing our eyes and sitting in what is called the Egyptian pose. If you have a chair, you want to sit with your feet on the ground, and you want to place your hands, palms up on your thighs, and you want to relax your shoulders back. Your chin is parallel to the floor. You're going to take a deep breath in, a deep breath out. Keep your eyes closed. Soften your face. Let's just take a moment here to really feel the breath, feel the cool air as it enters the nostrils, the warm breath as it exits the nostril. Ashe, yoga is where every breath counts. And so we want to really appreciate this breathing We want to appreciate the rate, the pace of our breath. We want to appreciate the power of the breath. 70% of the waste that we have in our body is released through the breath. So let's close our eyes and just enjoy the breath for a few seconds. As you inhale, draw the breath in through the nose to the back of the throat, into the trachea, into the lungs. And as you exhale, completely exhale as much as you can, deeply. Sorry for the noise outside, but let's take a moment here to relax our shoulders, to relax our mind. And now we're going to slowly open our eyes. We're going to bring our palms together. Namaste simply means the divine light in you salutes me. Divine light in me salutes you. Yoga is a practice that our ancestors have been practicing for years. So this should be nothing new to us. It should be something that we should be reclaiming. So the feet's flat on the floor. You're going to inhale your toes up, and you're going to exhale them down. You're going to inhale the toes up. You're going to exhale them down. And now you're going to bring your heels up, and you're going to exhale your heels down. You're going to bring your heels up, and you're going to exhale them down. Take a moment here to see how it feels. Moving your toes up, moving your heels up, and then exhaling them down. And now you're going to slowly lift your right leg up. You're going to draw your knee and squeeze your knee into your chest. If you can, you're just going to rotate your feet around in a circle, right to left, 3 times. And now we're going to rotate left to right 3 times. Again, what we're doing is we're increasing the circulation in the body. We're relaxing our body. And we're just improving the joints in the body. You're going to slowly exhale that right leg down. So by now you should know when you're moving in or up, you're inhaling. When you're moving down, you're exhaling. So let's take another moment to inhale that left leg up, squeeze that left leg into the chest, squeeze, and then as you exhale, release down just slightly and just start rotating. Inhaling and exhaling, rotating the ankle around. Place your legs back on the floor. Take a moment. And now we're going to take that right leg. We're going to bend the right leg and bring the knee onto the thigh. What we're working with now is the hips. So you want to make sure that the hips are hip replacements, knee replacements. We want to make sure that our hips are functional, are open, we can lubricate the hips. So inhale. If you can, slowly bring the knees up, nice and slow, and then exhale back down. Inhale the knees up, and exhale back down. And now release that right leg off the left thigh. We're now going to go to the opposite side. We're going to bend that left knee onto the right thigh. I hope everybody's doing well, and I hope you're enjoying the practice. So we're going to take this left knee, and we're just going to bring the knee up towards the chest. You don't have to bring it all the way up to the midline. You can bring it right up towards the chest. You can exhale down. Inhale up, exhale down. These are called joint freeing because they free the joints. Inhale up, exhale down. And now bring your left foot onto the mat. Let's take a moment here to close our eyes again. Take a deep breath in. Remember, when you breathe in deeply and you exhale completely, you're actually lowering your blood pressure, you're improving your respiratory system, and you're also improving the rate of your heartbeat. And so we really want to be mindful, inhaling and exhaling. And now let's take a moment to open our eyes again. And what we're going to do, we work with the lower body, and whenever we're working in yoga, we're working with energy. We're working with improving or balancing our left and right hemisphere, balancing our parasympathetic nervous system. All these things we need to do, especially at a time like this, where there's a high rate of stress, we want to make sure inside we have a high rate of relaxation. Warriors have to be able to relax. So let's take a moment here. We're going to inhale, relax our shoulders down, lengthen the neck, exhale the chin all the way down to the chest. Inhale the chin all the way up. So when we do that, we want to make sure we don't go back too far because we don't want to crunch the cervical spine. We just want to draw the neck back nice and gentle. Exhale down. Inhale up. Exhale down. Inhale up. Now relax the shoulder. I keep saying relax the shoulders back because gravity pulls the shoulders forward. We want to bring the shoulders back. And so we want to inhale, relax the shoulders back. We're going to take our right hand up alongside our right ear and just draw it over to that left ear and bring the ear down to the right shoulder. The right ear to the right shoulder. Inhale up. Draw your hands all the way down. And now you're going to lift that left arm up and you're going to bring it over to the right ear. And so we're just gently bringing that left ear down to the left shoulder, giving a nice stretch in the neck. I don't know whether you know it, but there are nerves in the neck that really connect to the heart, that relaxes the heart, relaxes the blood pressure. And so we want to draw the head all the way out. So let's take a moment here, check in with the body. Again, this is our higher energy center, the crown, the third eye, the Ajna chakra, the throat. All of these are the higher energy centers that we really want to protect. So let's take a moment, breathing in and breathing out. And so we've gone through a little bit of meditation. We've gone through some chair yoga. So now we're going to go in breathing. Called the Vishnu, which directs energy, the Vishnu mudra. Now you're going to take your right thumb and place it on your right nostril. You're going to close your right nostril, inhale through your left. Close your eyes. And now close off your left nostril, exhale through your right. Inhale through your right nostril. Close off your right nostril, exhale through your left. Inhale through your left nostril. Close off your left nostril, exhale through your right. Inhale through your right nostril. Close off your right nostril, exhale to your left. Bring both of your hands down. You just practice alternate nostril breathing, which is very good, as I said, for balancing your left and right hemisphere. It's also good for balancing your autonomic nervous system. It's good for improving your concentration. It's also good for helping you stimulate your third eye. And that's very important because the third eye is really important for our ability to develop our intuitive skills, our ability to know, to be the knower, to be the wise men and women that we are. So I want to thank you very much. And I hope you have a very peaceful and safe day. And again, namaste.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alston. We appreciate the opportunity for you to share your talents with us and practices that hopefully we can continue to build on independently of this time together. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, we now are going to switch to part 2 of our panel and that we have assembled today. And this will be led by our past president of the Association of Black Psychologists, Dr. Cheryl Grills. She has assembled over the past several years working with a variety of constituencies as well as individuals in legislation offices, both from the state level and the national level. And through this, they have created the Community of Color Needs Assessment Project that she's going to speak about today, along with several of the representatives that she has that will be also speaking about this particular project. So I will turn it over to Dr. Grills.
Thank you so much, Yuma. And good afternoon, everyone. It is truly a pleasure to be here with you all. I'm going to share my screen for just a second to introduce what our topic is this afternoon. This is going to be an overview of the COVID-19 Communities of Color Needs Assessment. We're going to start off with Congresswoman Karen Bass, and then be followed by myself to give an overview of the Needs Assessment Project. And then we'll hear from some of our Alliance member organization representatives. And these are folks who are the leads on the research design subcommittee of the project. And that's Dr. Ann Soff for the Asian American Psychological Association, Dr. Fiorella Carlos Chavez from the National Latinx Psychological Association, Dr. Huberta Jackson-Lohman and Dr. Kathy Berlew from ABPSI, and Dr. Jennifer Kelly from the American Psychological Association. Unfortunately, we weren't able to coordinate schedules for the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute to be with us. They are a member of this project and they represent the Indigenous and Native American communities, but I will share some thoughts from things that they have mentioned in our research meetings. But without further delay, I would like to introduce Congresswoman Karen Bass. And Representative Bass was elected to her 5th term representing the 37th Congressional District in November 2018. She serves on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs as chair of the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations. And she also serves on the House Judiciary Committee as chair of the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security. And especially for our purposes today, Congressmember Bass also serves as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. So I would like to turn it over to Representative Bass to speak with us about this whole COVID-19 concern and the birthing of the Alliance's COVID Needs Assessment for Communities of Color.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me some time with you. All of us are going through such strange times, which is why we're meeting over Zoom. This has become a part of our life now. Every day I get up and I think about the fact that there are over 139,000 Americans that are dead in a 4-month time period. This did not have to happen. This is completely unacceptable, but it is because there is no leadership at the top. This president has mismanaged this pandemic so badly that it has led to, as all of us know, an extreme disproportionate death rate amongst folks of color. And we know out of those 139,000, and I think before the day is over, it's going to be 140,000. We know that a large percentage of those people are folks of color. And so out of absolute desperation, I called on my long-term friend, Dr. Cheryl Grills. She knows that I will call on her when we need help in Congress, because I know it's not gonna be a shock to you, but you know, when we do legislation, it is not necessarily, and most of the times not, connected to data at all. And when you have a government and leadership of that government who does not believe in science and is trying to hide data, you can imagine how difficult it is, where we know that our people are dying, but we don't have the information to address it in a strategic, focused fashion. And so I asked Dr. Grills if she would help members of the Congressional Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, and the Native American Caucus, if she could assemble a group of researchers that could help us gather data. It really is a statement of the times that I, who work in government, have to ask somebody outside of government to tell us the information, because I cannot rely on the government at all. And as you know, the CDC and Dr. Fauci, they've essentially been completely sidelined. As a matter of fact, in one of the bills we wrote, we put in for the CDC, we gave them 21 days to give us the demographic data. The report they pulled together was so bad that the head of the CDC was embarrassed and apologized publicly for it. So I've asked if the researchers will come together. Members of Congress would be helpful in terms of trying to identify outside money, philanthropic money from foundations to allow this needs assessment to take place so that as we legislate, we can do it based on actual data and facts. Now, COVID is going to be with us for a long time because of the mismanagement at the top. I don't know how long it's going to take before there's a vaccine, but even when there is a vaccine, we're looking at least a couple of years of this. And the health devastation in our community is one thing. The economic devastation is something else. Let me just conclude by saying, I get annoyed when people want to talk about our underlying health conditions. When they want to say, well, Black folks, you got hypertension, diabetes, you're fat, you don't eat right. I don't want to hear about that right now. The house is on fire. Send a fire engine. Don't send a structural engineer to do an analysis of the foundation. I know we have underlying health issues. That is not going to help us extinguish the fire that is happening in our communities right now. What we need to do is a concentrated, focused intervention. But because there is no national plan to how we're addressing COVID, we're just scattering resources to the wind, then of course we're going to keep dying. And you know that in some of the southern states, 70 to 80% of the people that are dying are Black. But an extra benefit to the administration, 99% of those people are of voting age. Very few people under the age of 18 are dying of COVID. We have an election coming up in about 125 days. So we need to do everything we can to save our people. And one of the first steps is to have a needs assessment based in science done for us, by us. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bass. We are so appreciative of your leadership, and we want to make our contribution to legislative efforts that will protect and support our communities. And so I'm going to go back to share my screen and provide everyone with an overview of this COVID-19 Communities of Color Needs Assessment. So what we're hoping and we're expecting that this needs assessment can do is to provide a snapshot of the impact and any associated disparities associated with COVID-19 on 4 priority populations: the Black community, and that's African American, Caribbean American, Afro-Latinx, African immigrant populations. Secondly, the Latinx communities, the Asian Pacific Islander communities, and Native American communities. This includes potential disparate outcomes related to health, mental health, financial resources and hardships, employment, small business, education, food, technology, violence, housing, transportation, voting, and the ability to benefit from local, state, and federal COVID-19 policies, as well as disparities related to decisions about where resources are deployed and accessed. So this COVID-19 needs assessment can help us to additionally identify disproportionate access to food, housing, health and mental health care, distance learning, federal relief package resources, and other essential quality of life needs during the pandemic, and address the disproportionate representation of people of color in jails and prisons, with therefore greater exposure to COVID-19. So let me give you kind of an overview of what this needs assessment looks like, how it's designed. So in the spirit of UJIMA, collective work and responsibility, we're talking about a collaborative opportunity with all eyes focused in on COVID-19. This is a collaboration of the alliance organizations, which are the Ethnic Psych Associations, that's the Asian American Psych Association, ABPSI, the National Latinx Psychological Association, the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute, and the American Psychological Association. This effort also will include a group of subject matter experts who represent various disciplines or areas of specialization like economics, public health, etc. The information that we compile in the needs assessment will be directly shared in real time on a regular basis with the Urban League, who is the fiscal sponsor of this project. And the Urban League has assembled an alliance of national civil rights organizations that are focused on the constituencies represented in each of the ethnic psych associations. And they will be involved in various social justice campaigns that will have the benefit of being informed by the data that this needs assessment collects. We will also then, on a regular basis, share the information with the Tri-Caucus +2 or with the, all of the constituent focused caucuses in Congress. And the data that we compile will be given to them in real time, and it will help them to gather the information necessary to inform legislation. But this is an inclusive process where the information flow will not just be from our alliance organizations to those civil rights organizations and the congressional caucuses. This is an opportunity for everyone to be in real time in communication so that those national civil rights organizations will know what data is informing Congress. Congress will know about the data being used to inform the civil rights campaigns. And hopefully we can all start to work together and move out of our silos. So we're talking about a two-phase process. And in this two-phase process, phase one is what we call the rapid assessment. It will happen within a 6-month time period, to then be followed by a longer 1-year nuanced, deeper assessment in phase two. The different associations will be funneling information to the Tri-Caucus that is specific to the experience of and the consequences of COVID for their constituents. And then the APA, their particular focus actually is on a population that cuts across all of our alliance member organizations. The 4 questions that were presented to us to address for Congress or the congressional caucuses are, how is COVID-19 affecting the health and mental health of communities of color? And has it exacerbated existing health problems? What are the differential pandemic experiences between African American, Asian American, Latinx, and Native American populations? How has COVID-19 impacted the economic status of these communities? And finally, given the last recession in 2008 and the fact that communities of color have not recovered, how will these communities be affected in the wake of the pandemic? So we've all designed individually focused or group-specific focused projects to address those 4 questions plus, but we also have, and we'll include a set of questions that cut across all of our associations and organizations that can speak to not a comparison, but a relative impact and an understanding of how to move forward given that particular data. So this, in addition to being a phase 1, phase 2 process, this is also a 3-tier strategy in the way we've designed the needs assessment. We're using a mixed methods approach. So there's going to be surveys, polling, structured interviews, collection of administrative data, and the use of a data dashboard that will be publicly available, that will be updated on a regular basis so that in real time, communities across the country can also access this information in addition to the civil rights organizations and the congressional caucuses. The sources of data are going to come from what we call 3 tiers, plus subject matter experts and polling. Tier 1 is the most important tier. That's the foundation of what we're collecting. That's the community voice and the community perspective and the community priorities. So we will be using our connections to community-based organizations across the country to actually provide access to our members of our communities to complete the surveys, to complete the polling, to complete the structured interviews. Sometimes we may not always have the access to the tier 1 in some of the neighborhoods and communities we will be trying to sample as part of the needs assessment. That's where the tier 2 organizations come into play. Tier 2 reflects the national organizations and bodies that are operating at a national scope, but they have local reach. So for example, that might be something like the Black social workers, for our purposes, may be a tier 2. The Black social workers have chapters around the country. Through your chapters, we might be able to access communities in the Black community that can give us an appreciation from the community's perspective of how COVID is impacting them. There's also another level, which is the collection of administrative data. And that's where our subject matter experts come in. So we're going to have about 6 to 8 subject matter experts in fields like economics, criminal justice, healthcare, public health, epidemiology, et cetera. And they are going to be collecting targeted data for the purposes of informing the needs assessment on a national basis about COVID impact within those areas of expertise. We also will be collecting polling data, and we are very happy and pleased that pollster Cornell Belcher is part of the team, and he will be conducting polling specifically focused on our 4 priority populations around the impact of COVID, around things like messaging and belief in the vaccines that may emerge, et cetera. And then at the top, which is really just an anchor, is tier 3, which is the technical anchor, and that's the alliance organizations. What we are doing is holding the space, compiling the data, summarizing, reporting out, providing information. But again, the most important part of this phase 1 and phase 2 is what will be happening with and the access that can be provided through tier 1 and tier 2. This is just a very quick example of the org chart for the needs assessment project. So we have the funders and philanthropy who will be directly connecting with the Urban League, and the Urban League will have a research fellow whose responsibility will be to track and communicate with the national civil rights organizations. They have what's called a racial equity organizing committee, which currently I believe is housed at Kellogg Foundation. You have the Alliance Executive Committee, which are the presidents and board members of the Alliance organizations. You have a project director who's responsible for connecting all the dots and making sure all the moving parts are in play and operating according to plan. There is also, at the level of the organizations, you have each organization has its own organizational leaders, project managers, research leads and teams, and research assistants. The alliance members will be connecting directly with the tier 1 and tier 2 organizations. We have the field-specific subject matter experts who will connect with the project coordinator and with the organizations directly. And as you see all these moving arrows, we're wanting this to be a process where there's a lot of communication sharing, a lot of information sharing between the Tri-Caucus and the Alliance, between the Tri-Caucus and the Urban League's National Civil Rights Organizations, between the civil rights organizations and the project director itself, et cetera. So that's an elevator version of the overarching project. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ann Saw from the Asian American Psychological Association to give you a sense of what are some of the areas of focus, concerns, et cetera, for
AAPA.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grills. I'm so happy to be able to share some of our work with you all. I know there was a question on Facebook about whether Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders will be included. And the answer is yes, they will be included. And we have representation from our Pacific Islander colleagues as well. So I represent a team of Pacific Islander and Asian American researchers who are engaged in this work all across the country. And I'll share a little bit more about some of our networks and collaborations, just so that you can kind of get a scope of all that we're trying to get accomplished and what our reach will be. We, in our discussions, want to recognize that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are actually two distinct populations, two distinct racial groups. So Asians and Asian Americans are represented by more than 40 different ethnicities and languages, and Pacific Islanders have over 30 different ethnicities and languages. Most of Asian Americans are immigrants. About 14% of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders are foreign born. This is a little bit skewed because a lot of Native Hawaiians are represented in this group, but actually a lot of Pacific Islanders are foreign born. And I'll share a little bit more about some of their particular issues. We know that there are income and education disparities that impact Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. For Asian Americans, it tends to be a bimodal distributions where there are, some groups that are doing quite well and other groups that are not doing quite so well. And among Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, there are disparities in terms of income, education. For all of our two groups, there are health disparities related to higher rates of cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, COPD, tobacco use. And I share this with you because, as you all know, this has a big impact on risk for COVID mortality and morbidity. Our communities are less likely to have health insurance, and obviously that plays a big role in what we're talking about today. And for our communities, we also face barriers in terms of the need for linguistically and culturally appropriate care that's not always available, and also stigma around accessing care, especially mental health care. So you all may not be familiar with some of this data. Because the Pacific Islander communities are so small, they tend not to get a lot of press. But in fact, the Pacific Islander COVID-19 response team shared in May that the case rates for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders in California, in specific counties like Los Angeles County, in areas where there are high concentrations of Pacific Islanders, such as Utah, Arkansas, parts of the Midwest, they're experiencing extremely high case rates of COVID-19. And again, this is kind of under the radar because they're such a small population. So that was for California, and in LA County, we see extremely high case rates for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities. Additionally, we're finding that Asian Americans are facing higher COVID case fatalities, meaning deaths due to COVID, relative to the case fatality for the overall population in areas all across the country, California and San Francisco County in particular. We see this in New York, we see this in Las Vegas, in Chicago, in New Jersey. So these are things that we want to pay attention to, even though Asian Americans and their experiences with COVID are not necessarily discussed as far as the disparities that we all know about are. We do find through some of our initial research that these disparities do exist. And so we very much appreciate being included in this Communities of Color Needs Assessment, because we're finding that when we look at our individual communities, there are certainly needs and disparities that need attention. A lot of Marshallese, Palauans, Micronesians who are able to come to the US to work through a COFA, it's called the COFA agreement, a lot of them work at meatpacking plants in the South and the Midwest. And a lot of these meatpacking plants have not provided good PPE for their workers. And as such, there have been COVID outbreaks. So some of our research team that are focused on Pacific Islander communities are working directly with the workers, but also the meatpacking plant administration to try to provide better care for workers, better testing. But these are issues that are maybe not well publicized, but certainly affect our Asian American Pacific Islander communities. We also are aware of COVID-related anti-Asian racism and xenophobia, reports of discrimination and violence for those who may not even be Asian or Chinese, but are perceived as such. Since January, there have been thousands of incidents being reported of anti-Asian racism, xenophobia, violence. There was a shooting in Texas early on during the pandemic of a father and son at a Walmart or Sam's Club. And the perpetrator targeted them specifically because they were perceived to be Asian, and the person was accusing them of bringing COVID over. So we know that there are specific concerns, unique issues facing our communities. And I wanted to share one of our partners, the Asian Pacific Islander American Health Forum, one of these tier 2 organizations that Dr. Grills describes, a national policy organization. They did a rapid needs assessment of community organizations serving Asian American and Pacific Islander communities early on in the pandemic. It was just published last week, calling for the need for more linguistically and culturally appropriate resources, more funding for Asian and Pacific Islander specific organizations to keep their doors open, needs for more benefits and assistance with applying for unemployment benefits, and also supports for small businesses and healthy food access for members of Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. So in our work, we are first trying to identify what are the most pressing needs that are impacting Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, recognizing that our communities under this Asian American and Pacific Islander umbrella are so diverse. We do still want to get at what are the most pressing needs, what are the health and mental health impacts of the pandemic, are people having access to linguistically and culturally appropriate care, testing, and for a lot of our communities that have chronic health conditions, do they have access to these, to ongoing care for these conditions? So just because COVID hit doesn't mean that other health conditions aren't, folks are not impacted by other health conditions. So we want to get an idea of that as well. We want to understand educational and financial impacts of COVID. We want to get a handle on how well essential workers, not just healthcare workers, but those others who are deemed essential, like meatpacking workers, factory workers, do they have adequate access to PPE? And unique to our communities, but not unique to our communities, the impacts of discrimination because of COVID. So those are some of our primary areas of interest. And how we're going about it, we're attempting to survey 5,000 Asian Americans and 1,000 Pacific Islanders. Given our limited capacity, we are focusing on the 5 largest Asian ethnic groups: Chinese, Filipinx, Korean, Vietnamese, and South Asian, including Indian, Bangladeshi, Nepalese, Sri Lankan. We're also planning to survey about 1,000 Pacific Islanders, and again, the top 5 or so ethnic groups under the Pacific Islander umbrella, so Native Hawaiian, Samoan, Tongan, Marshallese, and Chamorro. And our sampling strategy is to work our social media avenues, especially social media and communication apps that are used in our ethnic communities, like WhatsApp and Line and WeChat are used a lot in Asian communities. We have a lot of community organizations who are partners, and we'll work with them too to get our survey out. As far as the survey goes, we would like our survey to be able to, our results from our survey to be able to be compared to other projects happening, because there's a lot of good research happening around COVID. So we're grabbing some measures from other projects as well. Since we are only able to, given translation and other resource needs, able to target maybe 10 different ethnic groups, we want to provide grants or other supports for community organizations or other researchers who are engaged on the ground and doing qualitative or quantitative research studies with communities. And in particular, we're interested in Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders who are undocumented, who have refugee or asylum backgrounds. And so we're hoping to be able to support that work as well, and also partner with other organizations and researchers to amplify the data that they are collecting. And this is kind of an ambitious project on our part to try to reach and survey 6,000 Asian American and Pacific Islanders all across the country. And then on top of that, to try to support and amplify other projects happening. But what we find as strengths are that we represent large national organizations that where each one of us have partners, longtime partners with community organizations who can help us reach out to different communities, especially communities that have traditionally been underserved. So as we started to work together, we realized that we already were engaged in other COVID-related research projects together and with policy-facing organizations as well. So we're really excited for the opportunity to do this work, and also to partner with our other other alliance members. We realize that, for example, meatpacking workers aren't just Pacific Islander workers, but they're also Latinx, they're also African refugees. So the idea of us being able to work together and help each other is another really exciting part of our work. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Saw. And that's a great segue to our next Alliance member, which is Dr. Fiorella Carlos Chavez, who's going to share with us what the National Latinx Psychological Association's approach is. Dr. Chavez?
Thank you, Cheryl. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today with you. And I want to share with you very briefly what our association has been doing since April 2020, when Cheryl contacted NLPA to come together to help the Latinx community, but also help these larger project and larger mission to serve our communities of color. So I'm very thankful to be here today. Very briefly, I would like to present, let me see, I can share my screen. Yes. Some of the core populations and the core groups that our 7 researchers at NLPA have identified. And I believe you can see the Word document. So we are focusing on 4 main groups from the Latino, Latina, Latinx, Hispanic community in the United States. And that includes Latinx across regions, talking more about the US national level. Looking at number 2, Latinx across age cohorts and family units. So looking at families that are taking on a caregiver role. looking at parent-child adolescence effects of COVID, for example, household food insecurity, and looking at education remotely. So how are parents dealing with having their kids take their classes online and the access of technology in order to fulfill school assignments. Then we're also looking, number 3, at Latinx first line and essential workers. And we're mainly focused on the tourism industry, all the industries that have been hurt the most in this pandemic, and also looking at farm workers in the United States. They are at least 75% of farm workers are Latinx, and 69% are foreign born. So we are looking at these workers who are an invisible population, but yet they have to go to work in order to continue the food supply for this country. And finally, number 4, we're looking at Latinx across different status. So DACA recipients, immigrants, documented and undocumented immigrants, and mixed status families with a parent or both parents at risk of deportation during this pandemic. We are hoping to run a mixed methods analysis of everything that is happening in all these 4 identified groups. So we are looking to do exploratory design. We want to look at what are the experiences of Latinx parents, adolescents, and even caregivers, essential workers in this pandemic, and how they have to reconcile what they have to give up. So giving up the time to be with family in order to go to work. Perhaps serving the same people who want to get rid of them in this country. So we are hoping to go for in-depth interviews with this population. We want to hear their voice, how they're experiencing this phenomenon of a pandemic, and also how are they making sense of perhaps a new provider identity for many Latinx youth and adolescents who may be taking on more providers' roles for their parents, and perhaps postponing going to college or pursuing an education just to provide for their families. And then we want to follow up with a quantitative assessment. So most likely it's going to be, the data will be collected through SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, and we're hoping to reach 3,000 people across the United States for the quantitative component, and conduct at least 60 in-depth semi-structured interviews for our qualitative component. As you may see, we want to look at the disparities created or exacerbated by COVID-19 across the different groups from the Latinx community in levels of education. Again, I don't think we are aware yet of the repercussion it may have for high school students, high school seniors, and the ones who are transitioning to college, then they may have to delay their education in order to provide for their families. So I think that it's very important to bring to light to that issue. Also, the employment and unemployment opportunities, the access the families have to mental health and physical health, knowing full well that there is still the limitation of language barrier for families who are predominantly speaking in Spanish. We also want to look at more short-term impacts of housing. Are these families going to be evicted because they're not paying rent? So we're also looking at the levels of household food security or the lack thereof in these communities. We are aware that families are going to the food banks and food pantries to have access to resources, but we have no data yet on whether they are being asked for an identification, and maybe that is an obstacle for these families to have access to a week's worth of food supply. Again, we also want to look at the experiences of Latino farm workers in the field. From my own research in Immokalee in southern Florida, I know that it's a predominantly migrant town, and right now it's a hot spot. Doctors Without Borders are currently in Immokalee assisting the farm workers, and these workers, they are at risk of contracting COVID, but they're also at risk of being deported, and they also have to provide for their families in the United States and their families back at home. So there's all these underlying responsibilities that we may not be aware of, but that these individuals are facing every single day. We also want to be attentive to the DACA recipients and the fact that they are perhaps right now the only ones in their families who are having multiple jobs in order to provide for their families, and that they have constantly being able to pool their resources, not only to pay for their education, but also to provide for their families. Very briefly as well, I would like to mention that for Latinos, it is very difficult from a cultural perspective to be away from family and not to be able to embrace them or give them a hug. So we also want to include those cultural factors in our research. Familism, the level of preference and priority that we give to our family above the individual, our collectivistic and team or group-oriented mentality, and also there's this underlying phenomenon of fatalism. Like some people may think, if it's meant for me to get COVID, then I'll get it. But we need to present also the possibility that it's not that it's meant for people to get COVID and there's nothing they can do. We need to be able to share the knowledge that these families can and should have access to help and enough resources. I would like to present very briefly some of the data from the Hispanic Research Center. So I don't know if I'm gonna try to minimize this so everybody can see it. Oh, here we go. So around half of Hispanics or Latinos say that they or someone in their household has taken a pay cut or lost job, or both. And we see that 49% that has happened to the Latinx community, and at certain and whether they have been laid off, it's definitely 29% of Latinx have experienced laid off compared to the other groups in the United States. So this is just a very brief put in context how everything is interconnected. The pandemic, postponing education, taking on a provider's role for the family, not perhaps experience of food insecurity, taking a pay cut. So all of these phenomenons that we're experiencing, we want to make sure that participants get their voice on how they're coping with those experiences, what they need from us, and we're hoping to accomplish that in our mixed methods study. And finally, looking more broadly across groups, less than 1 in 5 Black workers and roughly 1 in 6 Hispanic workers are able to work from home. And as you may see, that only 16.2% of Latinos are able to work from home. I am definitely one of them who can work from home, but I know that's not the case for the majority of the population. And with that, I want to thank you for your time. Please feel free to ask me any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. That was very, very informative. And now we're going to turn it over to Drs. Jackson-Lohman and Berlew to talk about ABCI's approach. And I'm also mindful of time. So we may need to go a little briefer for the remaining pieces so that we stay within schedule. And if you could stop share screen. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. And I really want to express appreciation to the other two associations for the wonderful work that you all have already done. I'm going to share a bit about our process with the Association of Black Psychologists, and then we will talk very briefly about some of the things that we are planning to do. Dr. Burlew and myself are serving as, I guess you could say, kind of like the coordinators or organizers in relationship to putting our part in place. And so we have, at this particular point, we have identified the people who will be serving as our researchers. And I think you will note that the other associations have their researchers here. So we are not the team, actually, that's going to be carrying it out. We have been putting that team in place. And so at this particular point, we have identified 3 key researchers, which will be hiring once, you know, all the funding and all of that is in place. We also have been helping to begin to identify how it is that we're going to be approaching the this analysis of this impact of COVID-19 on our communities. And so we are targeting, we have decided that we're going to target 6 different areas, 2 metropolitan areas, large metropolitan areas, and we actually had begun with a focus on well, let me hold off on that, because actually we had said we would focus on Los Angeles as one of those large metropolitan areas, and also a second area that is still kind of under discussion, because as you can see, everything changes from one day to the next as far as the impact of COVID in our various communities. So we will have 2 large metropolitan areas. We will have 2 mid-sized metropolitan areas. At this particular point, we are thinking about an area in Texas. I'm sorry, that was a large metropolitan area. New Orleans and Detroit were the mid-sized areas that we are currently thinking about and have under discussion. And the 2 rural areas, which we're also looking at in terms of where this COVID-19 has had a significant impact on people of African ancestry. We are also very much interested in looking at the impact of COVID on Black businesses. We know that the Black businesses were already hit very, very hard in 2008. And also that we have been gradually losing businesses. So there have been a lot of predictions about the impact of COVID-19 on Black businesses. So that will be an area that we will be looking at. We are aware also of the impact, the potential impact of COVID-19 on our HBCUs. So that is also another area that we feel that we must target and examine what kind of impact that will have on the HBCUs. There have already been predictions that some of them may actually end up closing as a result of this. And we are concerned about our unhoused, because we are very much overrepresented in the unhoused. So that will be another group that we will be targeting, as well as those who are incarcerated, because as we all well know, we are very much overrepresented amongst those who are incarcerated. So those are some special populations that we want to take a look at. I'm going to turn this over now to Dr. Kathy Burlew, who has been working with our research committee on the design of our research plan. Are you there, Kathy?
Oh, there I am. Okay, now you can hear me now, I think.
Yes.
So Dr. Jackson Lohman has already talked about some of what I will review, but Dr. Grills asked us to put together a research plan. And we don't have time to go through this in any detail, but I just want to share with you kind of some of the components of our research plan. You'll see if you just follow with me in the left-hand corner, physical health, and I'll speak to some of these: mental health, child welfare. We know that families have been impacted, and we know that many of our families live in housing where they haven't been able to social distance. And so we want to have information to give to Dr. Bass and the other policymakers to use when they're speaking of how best to move forward after COVID. We know that employment has been an issue in our community, and our needs assessment is including employment. We're not clear that our community, just based on the news, has had the same access to government economic support that other groups have had, and if so, we want to be able to document that. And even for those who are not looking for economic support from federal support, economic well-being, just many of our people are those who have been disproportionately affected by layoffs and furloughs. And then employment safety, that the kinds of jobs that too many of our folks have are the kinds of jobs where at work you can't be sure that you're going to be in a safe situation with masks and washing hands and social distancing. Dr. Jackson Lohman already mentioned the impact on small businesses. That's part of what we're looking at. And also, she mentioned HBCU viability during this time. Two groups that we're particularly interested in, that we'll call them vulnerable populations, the homeless and the incarcerated. We want to make sure that we focus on those groups. And then we're planning to include some questions on racial bias, and in particular, were people who, when people are approaching for health care, do they feel like they've been treated fairly? And we all know that we have reasons to have cultural mistrust. And with one of our researchers, we have a couple of items now on cultural mistrust in the healthcare system that we're including. And then, of course, we're going to have some demographic questions. The only other thing that I want to mention quickly is that our research plan calls for us to partner with local groups. Once we have identified our sites, local groups who could provide the on-the-ground support to actually collect our data. And we very much would like to have conversations with the Black social workers once we've identified our sites, so that we can see if there are some chapters that might be very helpful that might want to partner with us on doing the actual data collection for our needs assessment. And I'll stop there, Cheryl. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And so I'm mindful of time, and I think we have less than 5 minutes left, but we still have Dr. Jennifer Kelly to share with us what APA's focus is going to be. Dr. Kelly?
Yes, thank you for
Can you stop
having me here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and I can finish in less than 5 minutes. So what APA will be doing, we'll be looking at the impact of COVID-19 in adults over 65. and it's a highly vulnerable population. And so we will be looking at it in African Americans, Latinx, Asian Americans, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Indian Alaska Native population. And so what we'll be doing, we'll getting a sample population from Memphis, Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia, Mississippi, and California. So we have connections in all of those areas, and we'll be getting sampling from those. The variables that we will be looking at will be the physical health variables, physical health, mental health, spiritual health, life event stressors and racism, socioeconomic factors, and community impact. And a sampling of this would include such data such as the COVID deaths and the positive COVID tests in the population and self-reported health status. In terms of mental health, we would like to look at coping strategies, emotion-focused coping strategies, and solution-focused coping strategies. We'll be looking at life event stressors and racism and the impact of racism and related stress, such as loss of income, access to food and hunger, and housing costs. For socioeconomic factors, we want to look at household income prior to and during the pandemic, and also look at the highest level of education. We'll also be assessing factors such as food security, and that will be coming from the household pulse survey, and affordability of housing. And so we want to look at instances of inability to afford food, housing, and other necessities. And we'll also be looking at the use of substances in this population as well. And that's basically what I have time to present. And we'll be getting more information as time progresses.
Cheryl, could I just say, I wouldn't want us to leave this meeting without people knowing that Dr. Jennifer Kelly is the president-elect of the American Psychological Association, in case people don't know.
Well, thank you. Yes, I feel very fortunate to be a part of APA in these times because I want my focus to be on health equity, and I'm working with Brian Smedley, who is the chief of public interest of APA with this. And so stay tuned. We're going to be doing a lot over the next couple of years. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Jennifer. And so you can see there's a rich amount of information that will be gathered. And I just want to say as we close out that while ERI, the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute, wasn't able to join us today to share the Native American foci and the needs assessment, I do want to mention some things that tends not to be on the national radar screen. So for example, nearly 37% of COVID-19 cases in New Mexico are American Indian. And the Salt Lake Tribune noted that if the Navajo Nation were a US state, it would rank number 3 for per capita COVID-19 infections. And so their concerns are lifting up some critical issues specific to that population, like the loss of elders who are dying due to COVID. That is a huge loss for the Native American community because the elders are the keepers of the cultural wisdom. They are the ones who know the language that has not the languages that have not necessarily been passed down to their fullest extent. They're concerned about their invisible urban populations, about the lack of resources on reservations related to COVID, about the rising suicide rate among Native Americans in the presence of COVID, about the perceived risks and attitudes that Native Americans have about COVID. And they are also including the Pacific Islander population in some of the areas that they're working on. So thank you for listening and hearing about this COVID needs assessment.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Dr. Grills. Go ahead, Brother O'Neill. You need to go ahead.
No, I was just bringing you back in.
No problem. Thank you again very much, Dr. Grills. And I want to thank all the panelists for their participation as well. Congresswoman Karen Bass, Dr. Ann Saul, Dr. Fiorella Carlos Chavez, Dr. Jennifer Kelly, Dr. Huberta Jackson Lohman, and Dr. Kathy Berlew for this information. I think there is a question that I just want to have, Cheryl, so that I'm clear. If people are interested in participating or getting more information, how can they reach out to the respective groups, and where can we post that on our ABSci Facebook page?
So we will eventually be creating a website that will contain a data dashboard and a way for folks to connect with us. That has not been developed yet. And so in the meantime, folks can actually send an email to me at cheryl.grills@lmu.edu. That's Cheryl with a C, CHERYL.GRILS@lmu.edu. We do have some small amount of resources available for tier 2 and tier 1 organizations to help us. And we're also looking for volunteers. So, and any organization that can help us access communities on the ground, particularly in the neighborhoods that we will be focusing in on to collect some of the qualitative and quantitative data.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We'll make sure that we get that up on our page to hopefully provide greater support for this particular alliance during this particular time period. So we have come to the end of our virtual gathering that we've had today, and I just cannot speak about the spirit of collaboration that I have felt that has gone forth as we've joined again with both associations. But this would not have been possible without the assistance and the technical know-how of Helen Neville. I want to just give a special thank you to Helen, because she was the one that has basically pulled all this together and made it work through Facebook Live. And again, this would not have taken place if it wasn't for Helen. So if we can give her a virtual clap. Mm-hmm. And with that, I just want to, again, to remind you that we are going to be doing a virtual gathering each month. And next month, we will have 2 on August the 1st, and then on August the 15th. On August the 15th, again, it will focus on looking at the complexities of racial trauma. The presenters at that, or the panelists, I should say, at that time will be Drs. Georgia Grew, Wade Nobles, Jerome Chile, and Patricia Newton. Then we will convene again on September the 12th for another presentation that will deal with the intersection of Black and the GLBTQ population during this time of a pandemic. And the panelists right now scheduled are for Dr. Amy Robinson and Dr. Jeffrey Gardier. So please be lookout on the information, because hopefully we would like to get the publications out very quickly. For those of you that are watching on Facebook Live and you are a member of ABSci, we will be having our upcoming ABSci business meeting on Sunday, next Sunday. So be looking out for additional information for login. And again, you must be a member to attend that particular ABSci meeting. Again, I just want to thank wholeheartedly all of our panelists and our moderators and our speakers for today. For without you all, this would not have been possible. And as we close, we begin with drumming and we will end with drumming from Brother Cedric. So Helen, before we speaking, are we still recording?